The servant approaches the Duke, asking what business he has with him. Klaus de Balthazar is the Duke of the Lugwalset Empire. The man suddenly gets up and, approaching the servant closely, pins him against the wall because he wants to be certain about something. Inhaling the scent coming from the servant, he reminds him that he already told him not to use that cologne. And although Antonio de Hessen claims he's not wearing any fragrance, the Duke thinks he's being too sassy for someone working off a debt to him. Klaus is good at solving mysteries, and he's determined to uncover the secret the servant is hiding. Beads of sweat appear on Antonio's face. He wonders if it's possible the Duke has figured out he's actually a woman. Klaus advises the servant not to try to hide from him, because the more he thinks about it, the deeper he wants to dig. Roselia disguised herself as a man to change the original plot, but it seems like it's proving harder than she thought. 3 months ago, our girl was standing in the middle of the room, watching her stepbrother smash empty bottles. He was yelling at Roselia to get him a drink, like now, because they were all out of booze. Roselia de Hessen, the adopted daughter of Baron Hessen, just stood there silently, taking his crap. He couldn't wrap his head around why she was broke, since their dad should have left her something. Roselia glanced at Antonio and reminded him that he blew it all, down to the last penny. But he just demanded she sell something valuable then. Baron Hessen got sick and died, and that's when the family's whole fortune went down the drain. And his son, who should have been preventing it, was instead acting like a total animal. Our girl walked over to the table, grabbed a sharp dagger lying there, and headed straight for Antonio. Even though her brother was shaking and begging her to stay away, she was dead set on ending this. Antonio squeezed his eyes shut and screamed in terror, covering his face, but the blow never came. When he opened his eyes, he saw that Roselia had cut her hair. Since it was the only thing of value she had left, she told her brother to sell it and get lost. Antonio grabbed the hair, spun around, and stormed out of the house, calling her a nasty piece of work as he left. That didn't even faze her, because when her life's on the line, she can be way worse. Roselia knew Antonio wouldn't be back, because the loan sharks were waiting for him outside. Whether they offed him or not, who knows? That character never showed up again in the story. Even though the clothes were a little big, Roselia put them on anyway, rolling up the sleeves a bit. And just like that, she took on a new identity, becoming Antonio de Hessen to change her destiny. Roselia de Hessen was just a minor character who dedicated her life to serving the Duke and then died. Wouldn't you know it, that's the body our girl got reborn into, and she knows the Duke is coming to take her as a servant. It's been 3 years since she got here, and ever since, she's been preparing for this moment. She's not going to kick the bucket the way it's written in the original story, where the heroine falls head over heels for the Duke. There are plenty of other ways to pay off debts, and she doesn't have to go running to Klaus de Balthazar and fall in love to do it. Just like in the original story, the Duke arrived at Baron Hessen's estate. The estate looks pretty run down, since it hasn't been taken care of in ages, and even if Klaus sold it, he wouldn't get half the amount he lent the Baron. The Duke's assistant, Alejandro, is reading a report stating that Antonio, Hessen's eldest son, inherited the estate. Also, according to the document, the Baron has a daughter, Roselia. De Hessen himself passed away a few days ago due to a serious illness. Right then, the heroine, dressed in men's clothing, comes out to meet the Duke and introduces herself as the Baron's eldest son, Antonio de Hessen. The guy holds out his hand to the Duke, but he doesn't return the greeting. He coldly states that he's here to collect a debt of 5,000 barangs from his father. The heroine is shocked that the Baron could borrow such a huge sum, enough to buy 3 mansions. The Duke wants to know how Antonio plans to repay the rest of the money, since even selling the estate would only bring in about 3,000. The guy confirms his suspicion that he doesn't currently have that kind of cash. However, he asks for just 1 year, promising that he'll definitely pay off the entire debt within that time. After a short pause, the Duke asks how Antonio intends to do that. He heard a rumor that the guy got kicked out of the academy and became a hopeless drunk. According to Antonio, he wasn't just hanging around in alleys for nothing, and he's got an ace up his sleeve. Though he doesn't say it out loud, his power is his knowledge of this novel's plot. The heroine knows the location of crystal mines that, according to the timeline, won't be discovered for another 6 months. She also knows the location of a sunken ship overflowing with treasure. But the easiest way to score some cash is through art, which the main character, the Crown Princess, is obsessed with. She'd find unknown artists, help them become famous, and make a fortune doing it. All our girl has to do is find them first. Antonio says he's going to use the info he's gathered on the streets and his sharp eye to snag some artwork. The Duke thinks the idea sounds plausible, but he still doesn't get how the guy plans to pay for it all. Antonio thinks it's a fair question, since every business needs some starting capital. That's why he wants to hit up the Duke and ask him to loan him just 20 barangs. Klaus gives the guy a fierce look and starts to think it over. Antonio begs him to trust him and just loan him the money this one time. He promises to show the Duke how he can magically turn 20 barangs into 500 in just 2 months. Even though Klaus still had his doubts, he decided to lend the cheeky kid the money, but with one condition. Antonio didn't even see the two big guys appear next to him and grab him by the elbows. Scared, the kid starts struggling and begging to be let go, insisting he'll pay it back for sure. According to the Duke, he can't fully trust Antonio, because maybe he's just feeding him a load of bull. He asks where the kid plans to live until the debt is paid, once the estate is sold. The heroine freezes, because she really hadn't thought about that. Klaus decides to take Antonio at his word, but the kid will be paying back the debt under his supervision. Until the entire amount is paid off, he'll be working as a servant in the Duke's mansion. The heroine is devastated, because she tried so hard to avoid becoming the Duke's maid, but ended up a disguised servant in his estate anyway. In the Duchy of Balthazar, Antonio was given a room that turned out to be way too nice for a servant. Alejandro says de Hessen's got a slightly different role than the other servants. Even though Antonio's a servant of the Duke's house, he's also the Duke's business partner. And on top of that, this room's just 5 steps from de Balthazar's office. The guy offers to show Antonio around the whole estate. The only good thing about this whole mess is that she doesn't have to sleep in the men's servant quarters. As she's checking out the estate, she's finding it hard to breathe, because she's got her chest bound up so tight. Just then, a young lady runs past, bumps into the new servant, and falls right into his arms. She's light as a feather, like a little cloud. With a huff, she asks the guy how long he plans on holding her like this. When Antonio lets her go, he figures out this must be Klaus's sister, Cosette de Balthazar. Realizing he's the new servant, she sizes him up, saying he's actually pretty good looking. And since Chloe loves anything beautiful, starting today, she's making him her personal assistant. Lately, it's become a trend among noble ladies to have an attractive servant around, basically as eye candy. Antonio doesn't get a word in before Chloe's personal maid shows up in the hallway. Telling the servant to be ready to go with her to a meeting tomorrow, she bolts away from the maid. Antonio's left standing there, completely stunned, not having had a chance to object. Alejandro, though, calls him lucky, saying that catching a lady's eye on your first day is a huge perk. That evening, the main character flops onto her bed, thinking about the day's events. She definitely doesn't have time to be trailing after this young lady, who seems incredibly self-centered. She needs to get 500 barangs back to the Duke in 2 months, or he's gonna make them pay a heavy price. Speaking of which, Alejandro was supposed to bring those 20 barangs the Duke promised, but he's a no-show so far. The heroine's itching for a little peace of mind, it being her first day at the Duke's estate and all. She's feeling super uncomfortable and just wants to loosen this corset for a bit. It's getting late, Alejandro's probably not coming until tomorrow. Busting out of that thing, the heroine flops onto the bed, finally able to breathe. The girl chills out, figuring nobody's gonna barge into her room this late. But right then, there's a knock at the door, and the heroine jumps out of her skin, leaping off the bed. Grabbing the bandages lying nearby, she tries to wrap herself back up, but she's doing a lousy job in her haste. Thinking it's Alejandro, the heroine cracks the door open, only to find the Duke standing there. Turns out the assistant was tied up, so Callus came to deliver the payment himself. Stepping into the room, the Duke's totally lost why Antonio's got such a death grip on that massive vase. The servant explains it was in his way, and he just wanted to move it. Klaus holds out an envelope with the promised cash, but the guy can't take it because his hands are full. Antonio turns down the offer to put the vase down somewhere, claiming he hasn't figured out the perfect spot for it yet. He suggests just sliding the envelope right under the plant. The next day, just like they planned, Cosette heads to the reception with her new servant in tow. Out of nowhere, she asks Antonio for forgiveness. It bugs her how her brother's so hung up on the dough that he's got zero understanding. So, as someone who represents the dukedom, she's apologizing on his behalf. And even though Antonio says she doesn't have to, Cosette thinks the whole thing's just wrong. She's got a feeling Klaus is going to run into some serious trouble down the line. Then, Chloe just smiles and tells Antonio not to sweat it, because as long as he's with her, nobody's going to mess with him. The girl promises to protect him, since he's now part of her personal staff. That evening, Chloe asks Antonio to have dinner with her, even though he doubts servants are allowed to do that kind of thing. The girl doesn't see what the big deal is, seeing as he's an aristocrat. The second she says those words, she realizes Klaus is standing right behind her. Without saying a word to her brother, Chloe turns around and calls Antonio to follow her. The Duke notices that the kid looks pretty chill. He wants to know if Antonio's already collected 500 barangs, since he's got time to wander around with his sister all day. Antonio just reminds him that the Duke gave him 2 months to do it. Klaus thinks even if Antonio starts right now, there's no way he'll raise all the cash in time. The guy tells him not to worry about it, adding that he's just a servant in this house and can't disobey the lady's orders. With that, Antonio bows and leaves. Deep down, she's annoyed by the Duke's arrogant attitude. Like his scary glare can intimidate anyone. As Antonio turns to leave, he doesn't see a servant carrying a vase of flowers. They bump into each other, and the vase water spills all over him. Closet rushes over to Antonio to make sure he's not hurt. The guy insists he's fine, he just needs to change his clothes. Suddenly, the Duke's voice comes from behind, asking Antonio if he's injured. When de Hessen's clothes got wet, a bandage underneath his shirt became visible. Clutching her chest, the heroine frantically tries to come up with some kind of excuse. Meanwhile, the Duke keeps pressing, wanting to know what the bandage is for if Antonio isn't hurt. The heroine feels Klaus and Cosette's intense stares on her, but no explanation comes to mind. And at that moment, Lady de Balthazar suddenly claims that Antonio was injured because of her. According to Cosette, she recently slipped getting out of the carriage, and the guy rushed to help her, but ended up falling himself. The lie is so convincing that the Duke doesn't doubt her words for a second. Looking at the girl, the heroine mentally thanks her for the help. However, when she catches Cosette's eye, for a moment it seems like she's figured everything out. Since Antonio was injured because of his sister, the Duke apologizes for it. But Cosette gets mad at him for that, protesting, asking why Klaus should be apologizing for her. And when the Duke asks his sister if she hurt herself, she snaps back, wondering when he suddenly started giving a damn about her well-being. In that instant, the heroine feels like she's caught between two wild tigers, ready to tear each other apart. Turning to leave, the Duke tells Antonio not to push himself too hard, because until he pays off his debts, his body isn't really his to control. After he leaves, Cosette is pissed at her brother, shocked that he could say something like that. Antonio asks the lady why she helped him out. According to Cosette, she did it because she saw the intense worry etched on his face. Besides, she made a promise to protect Antonio from that cold-blooded tyrant. As far as Cosette's concerned, it doesn't matter why he wears that bandage. Maybe Antonio's got scars he doesn't want anyone to see. Or whatever the reason, he was clearly going through something tough in that moment. Suddenly remembering something, Cosette turns back to de Hessen. The Marquis's daughter is having a tea party soon, and he just needs to stand next to her and look pretty, so he should change into something dry now so he doesn't catch a cold. The next day, Roselia, in her usual Antonio disguise, arrives in Algris. Right in the heart of this village is the first painting she plans to get her hands on. In the original story, the main character found her first piece of art here, and has supported unknown artists ever since. Somewhere around here, in the market square, there should be a guy selling paintings, but no matter how much Antonio searches, he just can't find him. An old woman selling vegetables asks the guy if he's looking for something specific. Antonio asks her if there's a man around here who sells paintings. The woman thinks he's talking about Abello, but she hasn't seen him in a long time. If this dude's so curious about what happened to the artist, he can just go to his place and find out for himself. The woman said Abello's door had roses on it, and after a while, our girl finally finds the right house. She knocks on the door, long and hard, but for some reason, nobody answers. Convinced the artist has to be in this village, she bangs on the door and demands they open up. Finally, the door swings open, and the homeowner wants to know what the heck is going on. Abello Hantum wants to know who the heck is banging on his door like that. Just then, Antonio spots a painting behind him. It shows a woman and a girl in a blooming rose garden, and it's a dead ringer for the original. Now that he's sure he's at the right place, Antonio, turning on the charm, asks if Mr. Abello lives here. He says he stumbled across the artist's work, and now he's here to see him in person. But before Antonio can even introduce himself, the door slams shut right in his face. He starts banging on the door again, begging Mr. Abello to just talk. Suddenly, Antonio notices a blonde little girl watching him from around the corner of the house. But the second the kid realizes she's been spotted, she turns and runs. Squatting down next to her, Antonio asks if she lives in this house and why she's wandering around alone. But her mom told her not to talk to strangers. And now she remembers she shouldn't have gotten her hopes up being in guy mode. Apologizing for scaring her, Antonio stands up and promises to leave right away. But he hears the little girl crying behind him. Only now, looking around, does she finally realize this house has clearly been empty for a long time, and no one's taking care of this kid. Meanwhile, the Duke, with his assistant, arrives in Algris. Alejandro doesn't get why His Grace wants to build a school in this dinky little town. But Klaus thinks it's more than just a small town, seeing as how it's off the beaten path for traders going between the capital and the duchy. Since everything's focused on the capital, this town's growing too, and it's gonna boom even more in the future. And since there's already an academy for the nobles here, it's best to build a school for the middle class and the common folk. Alejandro's blown away by his lord's incredible mind, seeing as he was the top dog at the academy back in the day. Just as the Duke suggests they check out the market, Antonio walks by behind him in the same square. He stops in front of a shop window selling women's wigs. Meanwhile, Abelo's knocking back another bottle of wine, and his little daughter Erlin's sitting by the window, watching the courtyard. Suddenly, she spots a beautiful blonde woman heading towards their house. Thinking it's her mom, Erlin jumps off the chair and runs to the door as fast as she can. Bursting into the courtyard, she throws herself into the arms of the disguised heroine, who really does look like her mom in that getup. Abello rushes out after his daughter, apologizing to the girl for the mix-up. He tries to explain to little Erlin that this isn't actually her mother. Comforting his crying daughter, Abello explains that his wife passed away not too long ago. Roselia smiles and tells him there's no need to apologize. About a month later, Abello was supposed to see the main character, the princess, at the market. As Roselia correctly figured, he must have seen his late wife in the princess. That's why she decided to put on a wig the same color as the princess's hair, just in case. Kneeling down to Erlin, the heroine says she's sorry the girl mistook her for her mom. Looking closely at the girl, the little one replies that it's okay. She said her mom had these amazing blue eyes, but up close, they're nothing alike. Erlin turns to her dad and asks him when mom's finally coming home. My heart aches watching Abello feed his daughter these lies, telling her to just hang in there. I gotta apologize for that scene. What brings you around these parts anyway? You don't exactly strike me as someone who just wanders into a neighborhood like this. All I was thinking about was the painting, and now I'm scrambling for a believable excuse. But right then, Abello asks if I'm here to buy a painting from him. He figures I'm with that guy who was here a little while ago. Before I can even answer, the artist invites me inside to talk. After offering me some tea, Abello apologizes for the state of his place. "This tea smells amazing," she says, but her eyes keep darting to the painting behind the artist. Abello notices, figuring she must really dig the artwork. When he asks who Antonio is to her, she replies that he's her older brother. Glancing at his daughter, the artist sighs heavily and explains that the painting is his last piece since his wife passed. He hasn't painted anything since he finished it, hasn't even stepped outside. But seeing Erlin rush to greet the girl a few minutes ago, Abello started to get something. He realized that he wasn't the only one who was lonely, the only one who had been hurting this whole time. Up until that moment, the man hadn't understood that his daughter had it even tougher. After a pause, Abello suddenly announces that he'll sell her the painting. The girl wants to know if he's sure, because it seems like the work means a lot to him. The artist thinks he's been too self-centered, stuck on this painting, and unable to move on. But that's just dumb, right? It's just a drawing after all. He needs to pull himself together for his daughter, sell this painting, and use the money to buy clothes and take better care of her. Because that's what his wife would really want. Also, Abello wants to thank the girl and her brother Antonio, because they helped him get his act together. It's hard for her to hear that, because she knows even if she hadn't come today, he would have met some other person at the market and still gotten his head right. She tells the artist that his painting is definitely going to be recognized as a work of art. And even though Abello doesn't understand why she's so sure, the girl replies that it's just a masterpiece, and people will see its worth. The heroine knows perfectly well that in the story, this artist will get support from the royal family and keep creating masterpieces. After getting the painting, Roselia returns to the marketplace, planning her next move. Lost in thought, she wasn't looking where she was going and plowed right into someone's back. Flat on her face, the girl apologized to the stranger without even looking up. Just as the guy turned around to ask if she was okay, she looked up and realized with horror it was the Duke. Hiding behind the painting, She frantically tried to figure out what to do now. The Duke didn't get why she was covering her face and asked again if she was hurt. But then, without a word, still hiding behind the painting, she bolted. Alejandro wondered why the girl ran off so fast, asking if the Duke knew her. Klaus smiled and said that was impossible. But her eyes did seem awfully familiar. Back at the Balthazar estate, the girl cautiously looked around, but calmed down when she saw everything was normal. She couldn't believe they had to run into each other at the worst possible moment when she was dressed like that. She heads to the Duke's door, checking to see if he's back. Just then, Klaus's voice booms from behind. He walks up, throws open the door, and asks Antonio what he wants. Trying to play it cool, Antonio replies that he doesn't need anything. The Duke cuts him off, saying he's got some bad news then, 'cause he's got something to say to him. Klaus steps into his office and motions Antonio to follow him to talk. The Duke starts by saying that Antonio told him his younger sister, Rosalia de Hessen, was dead. But today, he ran into someone who looked exactly like Antonio. Getting right up in Antonio's face, the Duke adds that the woman he met today had the exact same scent. Antonio acts like he has absolutely no idea what Mr. de Balthazar is talking about. But the Duke keeps pressing him, demanding to know if Rosalia is really dead. 'Cause if Antonio lied and secretly hid his sister, he's gonna be in deep shit for it. It's only now the heroine realizes the Duke never figured out she was actually that girl. That dude's always been a cold, unfeeling bastard. He used Rosalia, who loved him unconditionally, then just tossed her aside like trash. And in the end, the girl met a really nasty end. Guts gathering, Antonio declares the Duke's talking out of his ahem. Besides the fact you don't say stuff like that to a grieving brother, he and Rosalia aren't even blood related. When they were younger, Rosalia's mom married his dad, the Baron, and brought her daughter with her. And since they're not related by blood, there's no way they could look alike. Admitting he must have been mistaken, the Duke turns away and lets Antonio go. But before the guy can reach the door, Klaus decides to throw in one last jab. He says if all this is just an act, then all he can do is give Antonio a round of applause. De Hessen shoots him a quick glance and walks out of the office in silence. Left alone, Klaus blames himself for acting so rashly, all because of that weird scent messing with his head. Back in her room, the heroine's stoked that she pulled everything off perfectly. She got the painting she wanted, and now all that's left is to flip it for a profit. Now she needs to figure out how to do it, but she's drawing a blank on how to get the princess to see the painting. Closet notices that Antonio's acting all stressed out about something and offers him an ear, promising to help however she can. She tells him he needs to be shining brighter than anyone else tonight. He can't be this worried. Antonio smiles at her persistence, and the girl starts getting ticked off that he's underestimating what she can do. So de Hessen admits that even for Cosette, this is going to be tough, because to pay off those debts, he's got to meet with Her Highness the Princess first. Hearing that, Lady Balthazar says there's nothing special about that. Smiling, she asks if Antonio knows where today's tea party is being held. Looking out the window, de Hessen's surprised to see they're pulling up to the Crown Princess's family mansion. During the tea party, Antonio earned the admiration of the young aristocratic ladies invited to the event. He gave Ikalia de Herden, the younger sister of the Crown Princess from the Marquis de Herden's family, a killer hairstyle. Everyone's raving about Antonio's talent and his unbelievable good looks. Cosette proudly confirms that he's definitely one of those rare, beautiful men. But Judith de Belmont, a young lady from the Marquise's family, just huffs, annoyed. In her opinion, someone that fragile can't be a real servant, 'cause he might just break at the slightest touch. Closet's getting all riled up, ready to throw down, but Antonio assures the lady everything's cool. He walks up to Lady Judith, introduces himself real polite, and asks if he can fix her hair. She blushes like crazy the second he says that. Our girl knows exactly how to handle these types, 'cause stuck-up people like her usually fall hardest for a little bit of kindness. Antonio insists that an updo would really bring out the lady's features. The girls at the table are blown away by how easily this dude got Judith to chill out. Not missing a beat, Closet chimes in that Antonio's got way more talents, like a killer eye for beauty. She says he's super into painting and has such a sharp eye for art that even the Duke admits it. Closet asks Lady Herden if it's true her sister's also into paintings. Ikelia confirms it, adding that the princess recently invited a bunch of artists to the palace, but she still hasn't found a painting she really digs. Seizing the opportunity, Closet mentions that Antonio recently acquired a painting that the princess might actually like. Ikelia promises to tell her sister about it, hoping that maybe, just maybe, something will finally catch her eye. Closet glances back at Antonio and subtly signals that their plan worked. And now, just a couple of days later, our girl walks into the Imperial Palace, clutching Abello Hantum's painting tightly under her arm. Finally, after 3 years of living in this body, she's about to meet the crown princess. She approaches the door with a bit of trepidation, the door that leads to the main character of this novel. Yvellion de Lugvelzet smiles and greets Antonio, who announces that he has something he'd like to show her. The young man is practically blinded by the princess's beauty. Overwhelmed with joy at meeting the novel's main heroine, he bows and declares it a great honor. Yvellion tells Antonio to raise his head, because Closet is like a little sister to her. Since she'd heard so much hype about this painting, she was dying to finally see the artwork. Antonio unwraps the painting and sets it on the easel, and the princess stares at it for a long moment. Yvellion's been quiet for so long, it's starting to make her nervous. But then the princess turns around, smiles, and says the painting is actually pretty cool. She says she can almost feel the emotions of the woman in the picture. Stoked that Her Highness digs the painting, Antonio tells her the artist's name is Abello Hantum. Yvellion thanks to Hessen for showing her this incredible piece of art. Then, she tells Antonio she wants to make him an offer. As everyone knows, princesses don't exactly have free rein to go wherever they want. And even though she loves paintings, it's tough to find really good ones, because she can't leave the palace. So, she asks Antonio for a favor, trusting his keen eye for art, and promises to pay a fair price for it. Yvellion wants de Hessen to keep finding and presenting her with masterpieces like this, which he happily agrees to do. But first, the princess needs to set a price for this painting. As Her Highness's maid carries in the check on a tray, our girl is getting hyped, because she knows Yvellion paid 500 barangs for this painting in the original story. However, looking at the check, Antonio exclaims in surprise, wondering if the princess made a mistake with the amount, because it says 1,000 barangs. According to Yvellion, this amount includes not only the price of the painting, but also a little something extra to grease the wheels, because she wants de Hessen to keep bringing her works of art. Our girl is practically glowing, because hey, maybe she can pay off that debt a lot faster than she thought. Just then, the princess is informed that His Highness, the Crown Prince, has arrived. Antonio bows respectfully, and he can't help but notice how tense Yvellion gets at that moment. This guy, with his shiny golden hair and sunbeam gold eyes, has got a real rough edge to him. Esteban Vandelope de Lugvelzet, the novel's psycho protagonist, always messed with the princess, and only near the end does he regret it and start to change. With fear in her eyes, Yvellion explains that she invited Antonio over to check on Closette's well-being. Esteban wants to know what the crown princess is plotting this time, since it's weird that she'd invite a duke's servant just to ask about some noblewoman's health. He suspects she's secretly in contact with the duke's family. Klaus de Balthazar and Yvellion have been friends since they were kids, and these two were so close you couldn't pry them apart. But everything changed when the crown prince came between them, and it got to the point where they despised each other. Arms crossed and smirking, Esteban wants to know what Yvellion's up to, contacting the duchy behind his back. He's not buying the story that the crown princess just wanted to know how Closette's doing. Yvellion demands he just spit it out and say what he suspects her of. The crown prince thinks her family back home, and the duke's clan might be plotting against him. Esteban's saying Yvellion looks like she is hiding something, but she's telling him to cut it out. Grabbing his bride's hand, the crown prince asks what she'll do if he doesn't stop. 'Cause if she's planning to drive him to an early grave like his mother, well, too bad. He's not that weak. In the original novel, this kind of thing happened all the time. All the doubts and misunderstandings just kept piling up into one massive disaster. All they needed was Klaus to show up out of nowhere and make everything even worse. And wouldn't you know it, the secondee. She thinks that. The Duke actually walks into the room. Freeing Yvellion's hand from Esteban's grip, he calmly tells His Highness to knock it off. She can't believe this is happening right now, with her standing right here. According to the Crown Prince, Duke de Balthazar showed up just in the nick of time. He smirks, pointing out that he looks like the bad guy compared to those two. After that, he and Klaus start bickering until Yvellion yells at them to knock it off. Otherwise, she threatens to skip the next diplomatic shindig. Since the Crown Princess is laying down the law, Esteban decides to bail. It'd be a real shame if Yvellion, with her sharp instincts, missed such a key event. But before he goes, he throws in that if the Duke crosses his path again, there'll be hell to pay for his whole family. Once Esteban's gone, Klaus asks why Evelyn keeps letting the crown prince treat her like dirt. She fires back, all riled up, that it's none of his damn business. Just then, the Duke notices Antonio's been standing there the whole time. Turning to his servant, he asks what he's doing there. Looks like the crown princess, who's clearly trying to hide the fact that she's going to be collecting paintings with Antonio, answers for him, saying she called a servant to check on the facilities. The Duke's wondering if Antonio's just going to stand there until he's told to leave. Once she's out of the room, she's like, "No way, Klaus thought I was standing there because I wanted to, right?" Antonio barely makes it out of the palace before the crown prince calls out to him from around the corner. The servant pretends he doesn't hear anything, but Esteban keeps right on his tail. Antonio turns around, acting like he just noticed the crown prince, and asks what he wants from a humble servant like him. Looking around to make sure no one's watching, Esteban grabs the guy by the collar. The crown prince drags the servant out to the garden, where no one can overhear them. Pinning him against the wall, Esteban asks what orders he got from the Duke, if he's supposed to be spying or just watching. He promises to let Antonio go if he answers honestly, but the guy claims he wasn't ordered to do anything. The crown prince is still pushing hard, promising to pay double, maybe even triple, what the Duke's offering. I gotta admit, the offer to screw over Klaus and make a killing is pretty tempting. But Antonio's sticking to his guns, saying he's only here to do a job, and that's it. After a beat, Esteban suddenly grabs the servant's wrist. Surprised how delicate it is, it strikes him as odd that Antonio is so short and scrawny. He asks the servant his name, and memories from the original story flood the heroine's mind. Back then, the crown prince, finding out the name of the Duke's little mutt, Roselia, ordered the guards to take care of her. They grabbed her and dragged her to the guillotine, and all her pleas for Klaus to save her were useless. Since Antonio's still silent, lost in thought, the crown prince is starting to lose his cool. This is the guy who, in the original story, was the reason Roselia ended up, well, you know. The girl got caught eavesdropping on a crucial conversation on the Duke's orders and wound up facing the guillotine. Finally gathering his wits, the servant tells Esteban his name. The prince doesn't think the name really suits the guy and asks why he's so scrawny. Antonio explains he grew up without enough to eat. As for his short height, he doesn't like talking about it. It's his biggest insecurity. Finally, the crown prince lets Antonio go. Back at the Baltazar Duchy, the servant enters Klaus's study and hands him an envelope with twice the promised amount. Antonio's curious what the Duke will say, since he didn't believe he'd return the money. Klaus takes the envelope, but wants to know what de Hessen was doing at the princess's palace. He's not buying the story that Closet sent Antonio there, and demands the truth. The Duke forbids using the princess for your own gain in any way, shape, or form. But Antonio fires back that how he settles his debt is his own damn business, and tells Klaus to butt out. The Duke jumps to his feet, grabs the servant by the coat, and explodes, asking how he dares talk about the princess like that. Antonio calmly states he has no intention of hurting Evelyn, and Klaus shouldn't twist things around, since it's putting him in a tight spot. As soon as he pays off the debt, he'll disappear, and if that's all the Duke wanted to say, he'd appreciate being released. And even though she looks totally calm on the outside, she's absolutely seething inside. After all, the Duke used and discarded Roselia himself, without even defending the one who took the fall for his screw-up. When Klaus is branded a traitor, and they want to execute him, she won't lift a finger to help him either. Instead, she'll flash a radiant smile, thrilled that he's finally getting what's coming to him. And this time, he'll be the one to pay the ultimate price for his obsession with the princess. After leaving the Duke, Antonio heads to the shops with Cosette, who's picking out a new mask. She notices de Hessen's preoccupied, and jokes he looks like the weight of the world's on his shoulders. Antonio cracks a smile at the harsh but kind of funny jab. Cosette's pretty sharp, so she immediately figures out Klaus is the reason he's in a bad mood. After hearing what's up, she tells Antonio to ignore it, cause the Duke gets even more unbearable when it comes to the princess. Her take is, he just needs to focus on getting the job done that he signed up for. Cosette holds out a mask to Antonio and tells him to try it on. He says the mask doesn't fit his style, so Lady de Balthazar decides to create a style that does. Cosette's always been curious to see Antonio dressed up in women's clothes. She insists that after everything she's done for him, he could at least humor her this once. Standing in the locker room in a wig and a dress, she's just thinking, how the heck did things even get to this point? When she walks out into the main room, Closet and Melda are completely blown away by what they see. Closet's like, Antonio was meant to be a girl, because he looks so unbelievably stunning, She's ready to hire an artist to paint his portrait. Her only regret is that they could only find a blonde wig, because Lady de Balthazar thinks dark hair would suit him even better. Closet hands Antonio a whole pile of masks and tells him to try them all on. Her birthday masquerade ball is coming up soon, and she's already sent an invitation to Her Highness the Princess. Now Closet wants Antonio to come to the banquet too, but as an invited guest, not just some underling. And even though de Hessen doesn't think it's such a hot idea, she insists that no one will recognize him in a mask. A couple of days later, the question of what Antonio's going to wear to the masquerade ball comes up again. Closet absolutely refuses to let him show up in his regular work jacket. Antonio's swarmed by maids taking his measurements. Watching this, Closet giggles kinda weirdly, totally throwing de Hessen off. Alejandro walks in to give Lady de Balthazar a gift from the Duke. Lounging on the couch, Closet opens the box and pulls out a diamond pendant. When she throws the box away, Antonio asks why Klaus sent the gift early. According to Closet, her brother said he'd be busy and couldn't make it, like always. He doesn't even care that this banquet isn't just for her birthday, but also her debut. That cold fish never worries about family stuff, just work and money. Klaus has never shown up to Closet's birthday parties, let alone the anniversary of their parents' death. The Duke's in his office, trying to focus on work. Still, Antonio's words kept replaying in his head, the guy asking him not to make a huge deal out of everything. A knock at the door snaps Klaus out of his thoughts. Antonio walks into the office, looking kinda hesitant. There's this weird awkwardness hanging in the air between them, ever since what went down here a few days ago. Finally getting his act together, de Hessen says he's here on behalf of the lady, who asked him to express her gratitude for the gift. After he says that, there's this strange pause that just hangs there. Sensing the tension, the Duke asks if Antonio wants to say something else. The guy pulls a box from behind his back and says he'd rather give him something. Klaus opens the box and finds a mask inside, but he's clueless about what it's for. Antonio explains that, even though he might not know it, the lady's birthday banquet is going to be a masquerade ball. Klaus says he's totally aware of it, seeing as it's the biggest drain on the duchy's finances this year. Feeling super awkward under the Duke's intense stare, Antonio finally steels himself to say what he came for. He asks if His Grace will attend the event, because it's not about the money, it's about his sister's birthday and debut. In response, Klaus points Antonio to a stack of papers piled up on his desk. He says he's way too swamped and can't just drop everything and change his schedule for some party. Chloe should understand why he's working day and night. But Antonio still tries to get through to the Duke that it's not just a party or a birthday. A debutante ball is the event every aristocrat looks forward to. It's where they network and find connections. A debut is a huge deal for girls, and even if the lady doesn't say it, Antonio's sure she's really bummed out. According to Klaus, someone who's only been at his estate for about a month doesn't know enough to judge the situation. They've been living like this forever, each just doing their own thing. The Duke's convinced he's nailing all his duties, giving his sister the absolute best. Seeing this guy's totally clueless, Antonio calls him out for slacking. Closet definitely cares, because after their parents died, Klaus is all she's really got left. Hearing that, the Duke instantly darkens, says Antonio's being a pain in the butt, and orders him to get out. The servant apologizes for wasting so much of Lord de Balthazar's precious time and bows out. Left alone, Klaus rubs his temples wearily, then glances at the mask lying on the table. The next day, Alejandro comes to the Duke with a report on the reopened investigation into the de Hessen family case. He hands Klaus the documents and suggests he take a look himself. It's no shock to the Duke that the Baron's daughter's death certificate was a fake. Gotta figure out what Antonio's hiding from him. It's the day of the masquerade, and Closet, with Antonio by her side, is soaking up the well wishes from the guests. One of the ladies there is just raving about how amazing and well-organized the banquet is, as always. Lady Juzet de Belmont walks up right then and seconds that, giving the birthday girl her greetings. She introduces Closet to her older brother, and he gives the lady a warm welcome and congratulations, saying he's heard all about her from his sister. After that, the young Marquis starts shaking Antonio's hand, totally mistaking him for Duke de Balthazar. He says he's been dying to meet the Duke in person for ages, and that's the only reason he came. The Marquis keeps showering de Hessen with compliments, until Closet finally sets him straight that he's not the Duke. Taking Antonio's arm, she introduces him to the guests as her partner for the ball. The Marquis is super embarrassed, because he was sure Closet's partner would be her older brother. He's wondering when the Duke himself will show, but Juzet cuts in, scolding her brother for asking questions like that. According to her, everyone knows His Grace is way too busy to bother with banquets. Jusith says that Closet must find that offensive, and her brother starts apologizing. Looking around and noticing the guests whispering, our girl realizes these two are just trying to get a rise out of Closet. Head down, she stands in the middle of the hall and hears everyone gossiping about her and her brother's relationship. Right when the heroine's heart aches seeing the ladies so upset, they announce the arrival of the Duke de Balthazar. Klaus descends the staircase, wearing the mask Antonio gave him. Approaching his sister, he apologizes for being late and wishes her a happy 15th birthday. Hooking her arm through her brother's, Closet replies that Klaus is right on time, since the Belmont heirs were dying to know where he was. She rushes to introduce the Duke to the young ladies and Mr. Belmont, and the Marquis immediately makes a beeline for them. He's laying it on thick with Mr. de Balthazar again. She's surprised Klaus actually showed up to the masquerade. Didn't think he'd really come. Guess that talk they had got through to the Duke after all. My words must have hit home. Klaus turns like he's going to say something to Antonio, but the young Marquis still won't let him go. De Hessen smiles and bails, leaving the whole crew to chat in the middle of the hall. Jusith watches him go, and it looks like she's cooking up something in that brain of hers. Her eyes lock on Closet, and she's practically screaming at her how wrong she was. Lady Belmont refuses to be seen as the loser here. Grabbing a glass of wine, she walks up to Antonio and offers a toast to his health. Jusith's dead set on taking the most precious thing Closet de Balthazar has. She downs her drink, then tucks a handkerchief into her dress. According to Judith, she's super lucky because she had no one to talk to. She suggests Antonio step away to some quiet spot for a little chat. De Hessen glances back at Judith's little brother, who's still tagging along. Even though he doesn't really want to go anywhere with this girl, he decides to eliminate anything that might bother Closet, since she looks genuinely happy for once. Taking Judith by the arm, he heads with her to a more secluded place, as she asked. Settling on a sofa in one of the drawing rooms, Lady Belmont invites Antonio to sit next to her. Even though the guy doubts he's allowed, Judith reminds him that today he's a guest, not a servant. Sitting on the sofa, Antonio warns that he can't be away for too long, since he's Lady Closet's partner. But according to Judith, 1 minute will be plenty. Meanwhile, Closet's frantically searching the room for Antonio, who was just here a minute ago. The Duke tells his sister he saw him leave with the Marquise Belmont's daughter. He doesn't get why Closet's so surprised. Those two are allowed to have a private chat. Back at the couch, Jusith's pouring Antonio another glass of wine, telling him she's really into him. She says she's been crushing on him ever since he did her hair at that tea party. While our girl's freaking out about what to do, Jusith leans in close and asks Antonio what he thinks of her. Then, like it's an accident, she spills wine all over his shirt, pulls out a handkerchief, and asks if she can help clean it up. De Hessen pulls back, saying he needs to go, but suddenly feels lightheaded. Seizing the opportunity, Jusith shoves him onto the couch and climbs on top of him. Antonio realizes the girl slipped something in his wine. He can't even move. Jusith smirks, saying she's always hated that stuck-up closet girl. Belmont complains that she always gets the best of everything. Jusith doesn't hide her glee at imagining Closet's reaction when she finds out she stole her partner and claimed him. She starts undressing Antonio, who's shaking at the thought of her finding out he's a girl. But Jusith doesn't get the shirt off before Closet bursts into the room. Clenching her teeth, she glares angrily at Lady Belmont, while Antonio desperately tries to beg for help. Jusith yells at Closet to get out and stop interfering. But the next moment, Lady Balthazar lunges at her and knocks her off her feet with a sharp blow to the gut. The heroine watches what's happening with admiration, unable to take her eyes off her beautiful savior. But as Closet leans over Antonio, he loses consciousness. He wakes up in bed sometime later, clutching his head, trying to remember what happened. Closet and Melda are sitting nearby. When Antonio finally remembers everything, Lady Balthazar reveals that she gave Jusith a serious dressing down and kicked her out. After saying that, Closet goes silent again and keeps staring intently at De Hessen. Finally, our hero realizes that both ladies are staring at her body, since she's only wearing a nightgown. Since Antonio's clothes were filthy, Closet and the maid decided to change him. When they took off his shirt, the jig was up, and they discovered that it was a girl in front of them. Roselia didn't think she'd be exposed like this, and begs them to let her explain everything. However, for some reason, it seems to her that both ladies aren't surprised at all. Nevertheless, Closet claims that she wasn't just surprised, but completely blown away. But she doesn't care at all whether it's a guy or a girl in front of her, because that doesn't change who they are. Closet just dropped a bomb, admitting she's been daydreaming about how awesome it would be if Antonio was a girl. Roselia thanks Lady Balthazar, but apologizes for the deception and begs for a chance to explain everything. Knowing her brother's the reason for all this, Closet promises to keep the secret. And Melda's on board too, convinced the girl had a good reason. The maid confesses she kinda suspected something, cause Antonio was way too gentle for a dude. Closet's stoked that Roselia's a girl, cause she actually went ahead and got a dress for her, just like she wanted. Meanwhile, the Duke, still stuck with that clingy Marquise, is scratching his head, wondering where Closet wandered off to. It's been ages since she went looking for Antonio, and she still hasn't come back yet. Suddenly, Klaus spots his sister dragging some girl into the hall. Roselia's trying to tell Closet this is wrong, but she's not backing down, saying there's nothing to worry about, everything's gonna be fine. She's betting Juzit's lurking somewhere, waiting for Antonio like a ravenous beast ready to pounce. Roselia reminds Closet that she was pretty harsh on Lady Belmont. Lady Balthazar is pissed and threatens not to help her next time. Then she starts playing the victim, pointing out that leaving her birthday party in the middle of the night is just not cool. Closet dramatically sniffles and turns away from Roselia, whining that apparently she was the only one who thought they were friends. Roselia smiles and points out that for some reason, she doesn't see any tears. Just then, they announce the arrival of Crown Prince Esteban and Crown Princess Evelyon de Lugvelzet. Closet approaches the Duke, who asks where she's been and where Antonio is. The girl replies that he wasn't feeling well and went back to his place. Klaus turns around and looks at the girl who's stubbornly hiding behind one of the hall's columns. Evelyon interrupts the brother and sister's conversation, approaching the birthday girl and congratulating her. All those present, let us welcome the Empire's little son, His Highness the Crown Prince, and the Princess. Chloe thanks them for gracing her evening with their presence, despite their busy schedules. According to Evelyon, they couldn't possibly miss the birthday of the esteemed Lady de Balthazar. While the ladies chat, the Duke and the Crown Prince turn their attention in the same direction. Esteban suddenly spots Roselia, who's trying to sneak away from the event unnoticed. He blocks her path, happy to finally run into her. Roselia bows and greets His Highness the Crown Prince, but he tells her to drop the formalities, since this isn't their first time meeting. She doesn't know what he's talking about and tries to leave, but Esteban suddenly grabs her hand, pulls her close, ready to dance, and tells her to stand still and play along with him. Roselia doesn't understand why he's dancing with her when the Crown Princess is right there, but he tells her to shut up and just dance. Staring down Esteban, she calls him out for being a snake, using her to make the princess look bad. The Crown Prince winks, telling her she's pretty sharp. Evelyon, totally humiliated, stands there as she hears the guests whispering behind her back about how the Crown Prince started the dance with some random nobody. Klaus just watches silently as the princess's hands tremble. Meanwhile, Esteban tells Roselia that he's no dummy either. When she asks him what he means, the Crown Prince responds that her wrist is unusually delicate. He smirks, figuring that Duke de Balthazar doesn't seem to have caught on yet that his servant is actually a girl. Esteban doesn't know why she's doing this, but he promises to keep it a secret if she does him a solid. Before she can even ask how she's supposed to help him out, the Crown Prince dips her low and leans in close. Roselia realizes that from any other angle, this move is gonna look like they're locking lips. As the dance ends, Esteban whispers, reminding her not to forget this favor. The heroine is freaking out, knowing she's gonna seriously regret this later. The Duke's heading their way, and you can tell by his face he's got something to say. Shielding her with his back, Esteban tells Klaus he'll scare the girl half to death coming at her with that killer look, unless he was planning on asking him for a dance. The Duke grits his teeth and tells him to get out of his way. Sarcastic as hell, he says Klaus clearly did want to dance with the lady and suggests he dial back the attitude. While they're bickering, the heroine sees her chance and tries to slip away unnoticed. The Duke spots her and barks at her to stop right there. But Roselia grabs her skirt and bolts, not even thinking about stopping. Before she knows it, she's outside, hiding behind some bushes under the windows. The girl's clutching her head, totally lost, wondering what the hell she's supposed to do now. Just then, the Duke walks up to her, calls her Rosalia de Hessen by name, and says she's got a real knack for running away. Klaus is trying to remember how many times she's pulled this stunt, including now, but she claims he's got the wrong person. But the Duke double-checked, and it turns out Rosalia de Hessen's death was totally faked. Blaming the officials who aren't doing their damn jobs, He walks up to the girl, who's covering her face in terror. Crouching down in front of her, the Duke declares he can now be absolutely certain Antonio lied to him. When he asks if she's been in contact with her brother this whole time, Rosalia begs him not to be too hard on Antonio, because he did it all for her. Since they both played him for a fool, Klaus proposes she work off the Baron's debt in the duchy, right alongside her brother. The heroine's horrified at the thought that she'll now have to juggle two different identities. Klaus thinks it's unfair that Antonio has to pay off the entire family debt all by himself. Since there's no turning back now, she decides to be bolder, admitting she regrets the deception, but can't take it back, because she's already helping her brother, and if the Duke thinks she'll run, then next time, she'll be the one bringing him the cash. Looking at the girl, Klaus can't shake the feeling that they look way too similar for being unrelated. He studies her even closer, but he's distracted by Closet's voice as she runs out into the courtyard too. The heroine rushes to Rosalia, who tearfully throws herself at Lady de Balthazar. Now Klaus understands how the girl got into the banquet. He turns to his sister and asks if she knew about all this. Closet doesn't want to hear her brother's accusations that she kept it from him. The Hessens were just trying to pay off a debt, and there's nothing wrong with that. Noticing the young Marquise has also come out into the courtyard, looking for the mysterious stranger, the Duke decides it's time for him to leave. Returning to the estate, he tells Rosalia not to forget about next time. Closet's bummed things went down like that, but the heroine's like, "Chill, we're good. We didn't get caught." Lady Balthazar's baffled. How can the Duke be so sharp about everything else, but such a freaking moron about this? Closet's done hanging around, so she suggests Rosalia head back to the party, and Rosalia's in. On the way, she asks how Closet knows the Crown Prince, then tells her to keep it down, cause Klaus is the type to sneak around. The next day, our girl's disguised as Antonio, chilling in a dive, wondering why she had to open her big mouth. Now she's gotta hustle and find that next painting ASAP to get the Duke his cash. A waitress comes up to the table and hands Antonio a menu. Our heroine spots paint stains all over the woman's hands and realizes she's looking right at who she needs. The second painting in the princess's collection was by Nadia Erlos, a painter who'd become famous later on. Antonio smiles and orders a beer, but passes on the food. Then he asks the woman's name, explaining he's just curious and wants to give some advice to such a kind lady. But even though the artist doesn't introduce herself, the owner, who peeks out from behind the counter, calls Nadia by name. Antonio smiles, confirming that this is the person he's been looking for. But before the guy can even say a word, the woman's expression suddenly changes, like she's totally freaked out. In a split second, she turns around and bolts, leaving not only the customer, but also the bar owner scratching their heads. The heroine returns to the duchy, completely bummed out about the pointless trip that got her nowhere. Lost in thought, she doesn't notice the Duke approaching her from behind. When Klaus speaks to Antonio, he jumps, startled by the sudden appearance. The Duke doesn't see anything weird about de Hessen being spooked. He figures he obviously feels guilty about something. Antonio, on the other hand, doesn't see any reason to feel guilty, since he's working his tail off to pay back the debt. Klaus wants to know if the guy wants to explain why his supposedly dead sister is not only alive and kicking, but was also at the banquet last night. He's absolutely furious that Antonio had the nerve to lie to him like that. The look Klaus is giving the guy right now could probably burn anyone to a crisp. But Antonio pulls himself together and replies that he couldn't help it, because he didn't know what his grace was really like. But now he knows how generous and upright the Duke is, and so, if necessary, he's ready to accept punishment, even though he had his reasons. Klaus cuts off Antonio's endless stream of words, but then suddenly falls silent. De Hessen can't figure out what he's trying to say with that hesitant tone. And suddenly, the Duke thanks the guy for what he said earlier. Antonio is stunned by such unexpected behavior from a man who's always so stern and cold. At the reception, Cosette called Klaus bro, and he suddenly realized he'd forgotten the last time she'd called him that. The Duke admits it all happened because of Antonio. Klaus thanks him for helping prepare Closet for her debut, and for making him realize how important it is to her. The heroine, back to blonde, walks through the marketplace, thinking about what the Duke is actually like. After thanking Antonio, he promised to act like he didn't screw up this time. Rosalia totally didn't expect that from him, and her heart kinda squeezed at the thought. Suddenly, on the way, the heroine sees Nadia trying to explain herself to the tavern owner, saying she was in a really tough spot yesterday. The woman begs him to forgive her just this once, because she really needs this job. But the owner doesn't want to take back a worker who ran off without warning in the middle of her shift. He roughly kicks Nadia out and slams the door right in her face. No matter how much the woman knocks, the owner won't open up for her again. Nadia only notices now that some girl's been watching the whole thing go down. The woman snaps at the stranger, asking what she's staring at and if she's getting a kick out of this. Before Roselia can even answer, Nadia turns and walks away. Sensing the stranger following her, the woman stops dead in her tracks. She tells her to mind her own business and take a hike, because whatever just happened is none of her concern. Roselia rushes after her, saying she couldn't just ignore what happened and wanted to know if she was okay. Suddenly, Nadia stops so abruptly that the girl slams right into her back. Lifting her head, she gasps in shock because she sees two thugs standing in the middle of the road. They mock Nadia, who foolishly thought she could be safe around here. The guy starts walking towards the girls, and a knife glints in his hand. Roselia's trying to get Nadia to spill what these guys want from her, but she's not saying a word. Just then, another thug strolls up behind them, smirking like a weasel, and points out the lady isn't alone. Nadia shoves the guy away from Roselia, claiming they're not together and telling him to leave her out of it. The thug's not buying that load of bull, but the woman keeps insisting she and the girl just met. But the robber thinks that's even better, because then Nadia won't sweat it when they take her. The woman, looking annoyed, starts lecturing Roselia about what happens when you follow strangers around. Our girl's telling herself to get it together, and it doesn't matter if this was in the original story or not. She just needs to survive for now. She's watched a ton of self-defense tutorials on her phone. They all said the first thing you gotta do is scream your head off to catch your opponent off guard. And that's exactly what Roselia does, completely throwing everyone around her for a loop. Just then, the Duke, who'd come to town with Alejandro on business, heard some kind of weird scream, but the assistant didn't hear anything, and since they had a meeting with the head merchant, he told Klaus to hurry up. The Duke followed Alejandro, but something stopped him again. Meanwhile, Roselia kept screaming at the top of her lungs. One of the thugs ran towards the girl, looking to shut this crazy woman up. The heroine remembered all her self-defense moves, took a step back, shifted her weight to one leg, put her hands up, and as soon as the guy got close, she shoved him away with all her might. After that, grabbing Nadia's hand, Roselia booked it out of the alley as fast as she could. But they didn't get far enough, because the guy with the scar on his face managed to grab Nadia. Right then, the Duke showed up in the alley and kicked the thug away from the girls. After dealing with the criminal, Klaus admitted that Roselia always managed to surprise him by getting into these kinds of situations. While he's trying to figure out what kind of mess the girl's gotten herself into this time, another thug comes charging at him from behind. But the Duke's quick on the draw and manages to block the attack just in time. Meanwhile, the heroine grabs Nadia by the hand and tells her to follow her. They duck behind some crates, but the woman's confused, wondering why they're doing this, because she thought that guy was a friend of the girl's. Truth is, Roselia doesn't even know why she ran. She just kinda acted on instinct. After meeting the heroine, Nadia suddenly breaks into a nasty cough, but assures the girl she's all right. Then she gets to her feet and asks Roselia to follow her, saying it seems she's destined to be in her debt. After walking a few blocks, Nadia unlocks the door to one of the houses and invites the girl inside. She says the place is a dump, but it's where she lives, and since Roselia helped her out, Nadia wants to pay her back. The heroine tries to refuse, but the woman plops her down in a chair, saying she's gotta have some self-respect. Nadia ducks into another room, while Roselia's checking out her super humble digs. Suddenly, the woman comes back holding a painting she did herself. Nadia says she ain't got much, and this is the only way she can repay the girl for her help. The heroine is blown away when she sees the artist holding another painting from the princess's collection. With a heavy sigh, Nadia says this is her last painting. Roselia's thinking, does this woman even know what's coming? 'Cause in the original story, this talented artist kicked the bucket from her nasty illness, never getting the recognition she deserved. And that abstract painting really was her last piece. Nadia starts coughing again and admits she's flat broke, can't even afford paint anymore. When asked if she'd seen a doctor, she said she couldn't afford it, 'cause she's drowning in debt and loan sharks are after her. Nadia tells her not to look at her with such pity, 'cause she never thought she'd live this long anyway. Roselia asks why she doesn't sell her paintings, and Nadia says she didn't paint them to sell. It was her only escape, 'cause folks in her situation, when they get sick, can only wait for the end. But when Nadia was painting, she could forget all that and get away from the harsh reality. She sold everything else she owns, But she wasn't about to sell her peace of mind. Realizing she's spilling her guts to a stranger, Nadia just tells her to take the painting, even though she doesn't know what the girl wants with it. Roselia thanks her for such an awesome gift, and Nadia just tells her not to come back to this part of town unless she's looking for some real trouble. But Roselia, after taking the painting, promises Nadia she'll be back soon, against her expectations. She figures that if this artist gets recognition for her work now, maybe she'll actually survive. So, the very next day, our girl's back in her Antonio disguise and heading to the Crown Princess's palace. When they meet, Ivalion admits she was bummed out that De Hessen didn't show up at Closet's birthday bash. But, she says, she was lucky enough to meet his younger sister, Lady Roselia. Ivalion thinks word should have gotten back to Antonio that the Crown Prince was showing his sister some interest at the ball. Hearing that, our girl starts to tremble, 'cause what Esteban did to her was hardly interest. Before Antonio can even answer, the Crown Princess asks him to set up a meeting with Roselia. She tells him not to worry, she's not going to interrogate his sister. Since she's going to be the Empress of Lugvalzet, taking care of and protecting the people of this country is her duty. But, she says, the Crown Prince, unfortunately, doesn't quite grasp the seriousness of his position yet, so he's going to keep acting like he did at that party. The heroine's just blown away by how insightful the Crown Princess is. But Ivalion keeps going on about how, as long as there are factions trying to undermine the throne, Esteban acting like this just gives them more ammo to use against the royal family. And she can't just sit back and watch the whole dynasty crumble, so she wants Lady Roselia to become the Crown Prince's wife. Antonio can't hide how shocked and surprised he is by all this. He tries to tell Ivalion that Roselia will refuse, since she's not exactly educated and barely even counts as nobility. Even so, the Crown Princess insists the girl will get the proper education at the palace. And besides, history's full of emperors marrying commoners. The heroine thinks that even for someone so driven to protect the throne, this is really pushing it. She's always admired her strong sense of duty and unwavering resolve, but sometimes she can't help but feel bad for her. That's why Antonio asks if he can ask the Crown Princess a question. He wants to know if what she said earlier is her personal opinion, or if she just thinks it's the right thing to do because of her position. Ivalion, that's a pretty weird question, seeing as how she is the princess. She can't even picture a version of herself that isn't the Crown Princess. Doesn't matter if they're talking about her as Ivalion or as the heir apparent. After a short pause, Antonio replies that some call him a ducal servant, others a fallen nobleman. But no matter what title people give him, it's just a label, and he doesn't believe it's his true self. Actually, the heroine really reminds herself of this again and again, whether she's in Antonio's form or as Roselia. De Hessen sums it up, saying that no matter what people think of him, he'll never forget who he is. Putting the painting on the easel, he apologizes for having to ask this question again, and asks how Ivalion feels if you strip away her role as Crown Princess. The girl reflects on her honest feelings. Looking at the painting, she admits that she's disappointed in Esteban, and she feels a little lonely in the imperial palace. That's why painting became Ivalion's only solace. She never expected much from Esteban. She just wanted him to respect her as a partner and companion in building their empire. And now, Ivalion somehow feels that the person who painted this picture felt the same way she does. It's breathtakingly beautiful, but there's a quiet loneliness hidden behind it. And really, these two completely different people are so alike. They both gave up and lost everything, even themselves. Antonio's glad that the painting, which depicts a vast, radiant, and beautiful sky, pleased Her Highness. The piece is called Freedom, which Nadia desires, and the heroine herself, and maybe even Ivalion. The Crown Princess smiles and thanks Antonio. The next day, there's a knock at Nadia's door. Recognizing Roselia, the artist opens it and immediately reminds her of her warning not to come back. But when Nadia looks up, she freezes, totally stunned. Roselia's standing in the doorway, grinning like crazy, surrounded by a whole bunch of people. After coming inside, the girl starts giving the guys instructions on how to fix up the house. Then, another person comes up to Nadia and starts asking her how she's feeling, and when she first started feeling sick. The woman demands someone explain what the heck is going on. Roselia says she's here on direct orders from Her Highness, who was deeply moved by Nadia's work. The Crown Princess decided to sponsor the artist so she can keep creating. With that, Roselia holds out a gift for Nadia, a chest full of paints. She reminds the woman of her own words, how painting was the last thing she wanted to protect, and now she won't have to lose it again. Nadia takes the gift with trembling hands, hugs it tight, thanks Roselia, and tears start streaming down her face. Later, over tea, the artist asks the girl to visit more often, saying she gets a little lonely. Roselia promises to visit Nadia frequently, and in return, asks her to make sure she takes her medicine regularly. At noon, our girl arrives at the Balthazar Duchy, disguised as Roselia, not sure what possessed her to promise to bring the money next time, instead of Antonio. She knocks on Klaus's office door. Entering the room, Roselia greets the Duke with a flustered hello. Klaus is surprised she's in the same outfit again, but she explains she needs to save every penny to pay off the debt. Arms crossed in a haughty pose, the Duke points out that she ran off again that day, as usual. Roselia insists she's very grateful. It's just that her friend wasn't feeling well, and they had to make a quick exit. Klaus leans in close, looking stern, and demands she explain what she's playing at, showing up at the ball out of nowhere, then getting chased by thugs. He doesn't understand why Roselia is being so stubborn and won't just join the duchy. But no matter how much he asks, the heroine ain't budging. So, she tells him again, she's way more comfortable this way. The Duke wants to know how long Roselia plans to keep suffering, but she doesn't get why he's so worked up about it. She insists she can handle things herself, no problem. Hearing that, Klaus slams his hand on the table, saying she and his brother have a real talent for pushing his buttons. He just wants Roselia to stop being so damn stubborn already. And again, leaning over her, he catches that scent, sweet and intoxicating. Klaus wonders if a perfume like that even exists. The heroine points to the envelope with the promised debt payment and thanks him again for his help last time. But, she says, he doesn't get to call the shots in her life. Roselia's begging the Duke not to get the wrong idea. She owes him money, not that. The scent coming off this girl is driving Klaus nuts, and he asks if she's gonna cling to her pride till the bitter end. Anyone overhearing this would think he's seriously after her, and she's playing hard to get to pump up her ego. The Duke wants to know how much he needs to pony up to get her to agree, but he doesn't even finish the sentence before she slaps him. Anger and resentment are all over her face, and tears start welling up in her eyes. She declares that from now on, she'll be paying off the rest of the debt through Antonio. Hoping they won't have to meet again over such unpleasant matters, Roselia heads straight for the door. Left alone, Klaus suddenly realizes what an idiot he's been. That slap actually snapped him out of it, and he can't believe the garbage that just came out of his mouth. The Duke doesn't get why he loses all sense of reason the second those siblings are involved. Closet bursts into Antonio's room, beaming, and asks him if he wants to hang out. But de Hessen doesn't even look up, so she immediately asks what's wrong. Seating the heroine at the table, Closet offers her some cookies she got as a gift and brought to share. But for some reason, Roselia can't get that jerk out of her head, and the more she thinks about what he said, the angrier she gets. Unable to control her emotions any longer, she snaps the cookie in her hands, and it crumbles into tiny pieces. Seeing this, Closet gets annoyed and scolds Roselia for taking it out on an innocent cookie. Since she doesn't like seeing her friend so down, she suggests they go on a picnic by the lake. And even though Roselia's not in the mood, Closet thinks that's exactly why some fresh air will do her good. Meanwhile, the Duke's at work, but he's so distracted that Alejandro has to repeat everything a few times. The assistant asks what's got his Grace so preoccupied. That's when he admits there's this one woman who's been driving him crazy. The thought that the Duke's finally found someone he likes makes Alejandro so happy. He wants to know her name so he can set up a meeting ASAP. But when Klaus says it's nothing like that, his assistant's confused. If that's the case, why is he even thinking about her? The only reason he can imagine the Duke thinking about a woman is if she skipped town with his cash. Figuring his Grace could use a break anyway, Alejandro promises to handle everything else and suggests he get some fresh air. As he walks, Klaus thinks about how ridiculous it is to even consider that he likes this woman. He's convinced it's all because of that weirdly captivating scent. Turning around, the Duke spots Cosette and Antonio drifting by in a boat. Meanwhile, Cosette keeps grilling Antonio, asking if he's really not worried about anything. Since it's not important enough to bother Lady Balthazar with, de Hessen says he's fine. Just then, a huge gust of wind snatches the hat right off Closet's head. She says she can just buy another one, but Antonio leans over to grab it out of the water. Closet tries to stop him, but he's so lost in thought about the Duke. He doesn't even hear her. Lady Balthazar barely has time to react before Antonio's already taken a nosedive into the drink. Her mind's racing, because she can't swim, and the fear of meeting her maker is hitting her hard. Roselia can't believe that, after everything she's been through, this is how it ends, and she's praying for a miracle. There's a splash, and Klaus, lit by a ray of hope in the dark depths, reaches out to pull Antonio to safety. After hauling de Hessen out of the water, the Duke yells at him to hang in there. When the guy finally coughs up the water and opens his eyes, Klaus is baffled, like, what was he even thinking, jumping in the lake like that? Tears are streaming down her face, because she just got a taste of what it feels like to stare death in the face. So, while the Duke's grilling Antonio, asking if he can go 1 second without causing trouble, Antonio's just staring back, thinking about how he's living with death hanging over his head. Everything that's happening now, it's not just words on a page anymore, it's real life. Bursting into tears, Antonio confesses to the Duke that he honestly thought he was a goner. He's like, seriously? Do you really have to come down so hard on someone who barely made it? Just then, Closet comes running up to them, having just docked the boat. She's rushing over to make sure Antonio's okay, and if he can even breathe. Closet is super freaked out and tells him never to pull a stunt like that again, jumping in the water for some stupid hat. De Hessen promises her he won't and says he's really sorry. He looks up and catches the Duke giving him this weird look. Klaus is already turning to leave, and Antonio thanks him for saving his life. But without even turning around, he just tells the guy to take care of himself. Closet can't wrap his head around how he can be so heartless and cold-blooded when someone almost died right in front of him. When the Duke gets back to the estate, Alejandro's surprised, wondering why he looks like he just walked in from a downpour. Klaus doesn't answer though, just walks right past, totally lost in his own thoughts. He can't get Antonio, who almost died, out of his head, and the Duke's trying to figure out what this weird feeling inside him is. De Hessen pays a visit to the Crown Princess and tells her that even though Nadia refused payment for the painting, she accepted sponsorship. Hearing that Abelohantom is also actively working on his pieces now, Evelion praises Antonio for a job well done. According to de Hessen, he only did what was right. Evelion wants to ask Antonio about something, and tells him that a delegation will soon arrive from the Raphelios Empire. Hearing this, our girl realizes it's time for the second male lead of the novel to show up. So, according to the Crown Princess, as soon as the ambassadors arrive, there's going to be a welcome banquet in their honor. And Evelion wants Antonio to attend as a guest of honor, along with Roselia. The heroine can't figure out why everyone's so eager to see both sides of her at once. Antonio tries to decline the invitation, saying a simple servant showing up could cause some problems. Evelion agrees that his argument makes sense, given the situation, but then she suggests that maybe just Roselia should attend the banquet. Since Antonio tries to dissuade the Crown Princess again, she worries she's asking too much, and explains she just wanted to show the de Hessen family some kindness. Evelion declares that, clearly, she's just destined to be alone, admiring paintings and wallowing in her misery. And even though Antonio knows she's being deliberately dramatic, he promises to talk it over with Roselia. Leaving the room, the heroine thinks about how things are just getting more complicated every day, especially now that she has to prepare for the imperial banquet too. Barely has she wrapped her head around that, when His Highness, the Crown Prince, strolls up. And even though she greets him properly, Esteban thinks she's way too cold to someone who knows her secret. Roselia's thinking he could stand to be a little warmer to the Crown Princess himself. She's about to curtsy and leave when Esteban starts talking again. He asks if Roselia knows about the Raphelios family, whose bodies naturally give off a scent. Not understanding what he's even babbling about, she asks why he's bringing it up. Esteban replies that Roselia clearly doesn't know as much about herself as she thinks. He's heard she's not actually related by blood to Baron Hessen. When asked if she knows anything about her parents, Roselia says her mother died young and didn't tell her anything. Esteban says this is her chance to find out, because someone related to her by blood is in the delegation. But the Crown Prince doesn't get to say who it is, because a guard runs up to tell him the ambassadors have arrived. Esteban promises to be there as soon as he's done talking, but when he turns around, Roselia's already gone. The Crown Prince watches the girl run off, bummed because he was going to give her some advice. If Roselia doesn't learn to control this herself, she's going to be in a world of trouble later on. It's always been a huge honor for Alejandro to serve as the Duke's most trusted secretary. Lord de Balthazar always throws himself completely into his work, but lately his assistants noticed he's been acting a little off. The Duke will suddenly sigh real deep, or just start talking to himself, which he never used to do. Since he seems like he's constantly stressed out, Alejandro's decided to leave him alone during those moments. And today, on one of those days, the Duke tells his assistant to send Antonio in. Alejandro heads off to carry out the order, thinking about how screwed poor Antonio must be. De Hessen walks into the Duke's office, all tense, figuring he's about to get reamed out again. But surprise, surprise, Klaus asks him about Roselia, like if she's got some boyfriend she's promised her future to. Antonio's totally lost, wondering why he's even asking. And then the Duke drops the bomb. He's interested in his sister. The guy's so floored, he's speechless for a minute. But Klaus doesn't see what the big deal is. I mean, a guy and a girl can have a thing for each other, right? Since Antonio's just stammering, the Duke gets impatient and asks again. Instead of answering, De Hessen blurts out that it's just not on, it's forbidden. Our girl knows exactly how this whole thing goes down, so they absolutely can't be together. And to make sure it doesn't happen, Antonio straight up lies and says Roselia's already got a fiancé. The Duke's genuinely baffled how this so-called lover can just stand by and watch her suffer, drowning in debt, wandering around destitute, and running from thugs. Antonio says it's because they live so far apart. After thinking for a sec, Klaus declares that if there aren't any guards at the gate, he's just gonna walk right in. But Antonio thinks that's a clear violation of boundaries. He says Roselia isn't planning on seeing anyone anyway, not while she's got a sweetheart. The Duke finds Antonio's behavior pretty damn weird. He doesn't get why the guy's reacting like this to someone like him, with his status and wealth. Taking a closer look, Klaus asks if there might be some other reason. But then, just as unexpectedly, he suddenly turns around and, saying he understands Antonio's love for his sister, tells him to get lost. Totally lost by this cold-blooded tyrant's strange behavior, De Hessen leaves the office. Left alone, the Duke wonders what he was even expecting and tells himself to get it together and snap out of it. He tells himself it's not about Antonio at all. He's just really drawn to Roselia. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince and Princess greet a delegation from Raphelios, welcoming them to Lugvelzet. Marquis Johannes von Eucliode steps forward and, taking Euvelion's hand, introduces himself with a smile. The Marquise gets the feeling Her Highness wants to say something to him, and he asks her about it. The princess really wants to know, even though it might seem like a rude question upon first meeting, if Eucliode has a younger brother. Hearing this, Esteban realizes that Evelion felt the same thing he did. However, the Marquis answers that he doesn't have a younger brother, and the Crown Princess apologizes to him. It didn't escape Esteban's notice either how much this guy looks like Antonio, or more accurately, Roselia. And then Eucliode reveals that he actually had a younger sister. Thing is, she vanished over a decade ago, and we still don't know if she's alive or not. The Crown Princess feels bad for bringing it up, but the Marquis says it's cool, it's ancient history anyway. Esteban offers to escort Eucliode back to his chambers. Trailing behind the Crown Prince and Princess, the Marquis thinks about his sister, someone he hasn't thought about in ages. The last time he saw Cecilia and their mother, the girl was just 3 years old. He wonders what Cecilia's up to now, 'cause if she's still around, she'd be all grown up. Pulling up to the banquet hall, decked out for the delegation from Raphelios, Clausette's buzzing with excitement, which Rosealia definitely isn't. Looks like every noble in the Empire's showing up to tonight's shindig, and Rosealia feels like she shouldn't even be here, seeing as she barely qualifies as nobility. But Clausette reassures her, reminding her she's an honored guest, personally invited by the Crown Princess. Grabbing her friend's hand, she drags her into the hall, eager to see who's shown up tonight. Lady Closet's proving pretty popular at the banquet, and before long, she's asked for the first dance. The heroine scans the room, hoping to spot the delegation from Raphelios, 'cause she's dying to see the second male lead. Nearby, she notices an incredibly handsome guy surrounded by ladies. While she's racking her brain trying to remember how this character was described in the novel and figure out if it's him, His Highness the Crown Prince approaches Roselia. The heroine curtsies, but Esteban gestures for her to stand up straight. He thinks she's being a bit much, seeing as how last time he tried to help her out, she bolted like she saw a ghost. Roselia tries to excuse her escape by saying the Crown Prince looked busy, and she didn't want to bother him, let alone offend him. Esteban's willing to forgive her if she promises him another dance in return. Meanwhile, the Duke calls Alejandro over and tells him to handle the rest of the paperwork himself. And he's heading to this banquet to make a killer impression, setting him up for those delegation talks. He's planning to laser focus on business, not Antonio and Roselia, hoping the event will help him forget everything. But those plans are shot to hell, 'cause the second he walks into the ballroom, he spots Roselia chatting with the Crown Prince. He's clueless why she's there, but feels a wave of relief that it's her and not Antonio he ran into. Still, the fact that she's cozying up to the crown prince again is really getting under Klaus's skin. Esteban tries to snag Roselia for a dance, claiming he needs to tell her something important, but she suggests they just talk. Just then, Klaus walks up, because he was also hoping to be her first dance partner tonight. The guests are starting to buzz, whispering about who this lady is that the crown prince and the Duke de Balthazar are fighting over. While Esteban reminds Klaus about the pecking order, Klaus shoots back that His Highness should respect Roselia's choice. While they're busy going at it, she's thinking, "Why are they putting me through this crap? I can't stand either of them." And there they are, both men reaching out to her, leaving the choice up to her. Still, in her mind, a heartless guy is better than a married one, so she goes to dance with the Duke. Klaus is honored by her choice, but Roselia asks him not to get the wrong idea, because she didn't pick him because she has feelings for him. She's sure he doesn't like her either. And he had his own reasons for asking her to dance. The way she sees it, Klaus did it because of the crown princess. If His Highness dances with Roselia again, Evelian's gonna have problems. Klaus admits that's not entirely true, because he didn't want to lose Roselia to the crown prince. Her face goes bright red when she realizes he was serious about being interested in her. According to Klaus, he just doesn't get Roselia, who's got the crown prince completely obsessed. He tells her to turn around, and she sees Esteban staring daggers at her, like he's trying to burn holes through her. The Duke's certain that right after the dance, the crown prince will be ready to snatch Roselia away from him. Since the girl's clueless about what to do, Klaus just grabs her hand and pulls her out of the hall without a word. He takes Roselia out onto the balcony and suggests she stay there until things cool down. He's curious how well she knows His Highness, and even though Klaus doesn't get exactly what's going on, Roselia's gotta realize that the crown prince's interest in her can't lead to anything good. But she never asked for his attention, and she's just as confused about it. While Roselia's explaining that she didn't have anything to do with it, the Duke spots Esteban walking by. He clamps his hand over her mouth, signals her to be quiet, and ducks behind the door with her. The crown prince doesn't notice anyone's on the balcony and walks on past. When Klaus turns back to Roselia, who he's still holding by the shoulders, he freezes, totally captivated by her. Flustered by how close they are, she asks the Duke to back off a little, but Klaus is stroking her face, telling her how amazing she smells. Then he leans in and kisses Roselia right on the lips. She's thinking to herself, she actually likes the warmth of his lips. But a second later, she snaps out of it and shoves him away. Roselia covers her face, totally overwhelmed, and runs off. She's booking it down the hall, wondering if she's lost her mind, because she feels like she's under some kind of spell. Just then, Esteban cuts her off, grabs her shoulders, and reminds her he had something important to tell her. Even though Roselia doesn't want to talk right now, he tells her the whole palace is filled with her scent. The crown prince wanted to warn her sooner, but she's always running off somewhere, and it's giving him a headache. Sooner or later, someone's gonna notice, and she needs to be careful. She subtly tries to sniff herself, not understanding what scent he's talking about. Esteban's also warning Roselia to stay away from the Duke, because even though he finds it a little annoying, he's got a thing for her, and honestly, he'd rather not deal with her at all. Roselia's thinking, is she about to become like Klaus, the one who stirs up trouble between the main characters, but ultimately gets taken down once they sort out their differences? She absolutely can't get involved with the Duke, and she needs to get her act together, like yesterday. Little does she know, a gray-haired dude with an eye patch has been watching the whole thing. When our girl gets back to the ballroom, Chloe's all over her immediately. She demands to know what was so important that Roselia had to ditch her. Even though she's flashing back to that kiss with Klaus, she quickly assures Chloe she didn't go anywhere. Lady Balthazar thinks her friend's words sound a little fishy. Looking at her, she's trying to imagine Chloe's reaction if she ever found out about that kiss with her brother. Remembering Esteban's words, Roselia asks the girl if she smells of anything, but she can't smell a thing. The heroine wants to get out of this banquet ASAP and asks Closet for permission, saying she's totally wiped out. Lady Balthazar eyes Roselia and figures she's got a fever, 'cause she's gone bright red. She agrees the girl should head back and goes to call for a carriage. Waiting for the carriage, the heroine's thinking about ditching this place fast before she runs into Klaus, 'cause she doesn't know how to face him now. Just then, the Duke comes out of the palace, looking around. Thinking he's looking for her, Roselia tries to find somewhere to hide. And at that moment, Marquis Euclid is waiting nearby for his carriage. Since the heroine's focused on keeping an eye on Klaus so she doesn't get spotted, she doesn't look where she's going and accidentally bumps into Johannes. Their bright green eyes meet, and right at that second, the Duke spots them. Not wanting to deal with Klaus, the heroine, apologizing in advance for this kind of first meeting, asks the Marquise for a ride. Johannes smiles, offering the girl a ride in his carriage. Watching all this from the sidelines, the Duke tries to figure out why those two are leaving together. He remembers Antonio's words and wonders if the Marquise could be Rosalia's secret admirer. Once they're safe, the heroine thanks the man for so readily agreeing to her sudden request. Euclion's sure the girl had her reasons, so he couldn't refuse her. Rosalia appreciates it and asks him to drop her off somewhere nearby. But Johannes refuses and insists on escorting her home, since it's dangerous for a lady to walk alone so late at night. Realizing she can't go back to the duchy in this situation, the heroine decides to stay with Nadia tonight. Suddenly, the Marquis asks the girl if she doesn't think they look a little alike. Only after he says that does Rosalia realize that it's actually true. Blushing a little, she says there are lots of people in the world who look alike. When Johannes finally introduces himself, Rosalia realizes she's face-to-face with the novel's other main character. He tells her he's here as part of a delegation from Raphelios, and she admits she's heard all about him. Peeking out the window, she says she lives close by and asks him to drop her off so she can walk a bit. Stepping out of the carriage, she thanks the Marquis again for his help. As they part ways, Johannes adds that he's really looking forward to seeing her again. Watching Rosalia go, he orders his assistant to find out everything about that girl. Even though her hair's a different color, she looks so much like someone he lost a long, long time ago. Back from the banquet, a tired Cosette is about to go to bed, and Klaus asks his sister where Antonio is. She doesn't get why he's asking. Antonio should be in his room at this hour. Klaus is surprised by his sister's reaction, but she keeps telling him to leave the guy alone since he's not feeling well today. The Duke didn't listen, and just a couple of minutes later, he's banging on Antonio's door. Since nobody answers from the bedroom, he opens the door and walks in. But the Duke doesn't find anyone in the room, and the guy's midnight escape piques his curiosity. The next morning, Nadia asks Rosalia to explain why she showed up in the middle of the night, asking for a place to crash. She figures the girl either got kicked out or it's got something to do with a boy. The way she's reacting to that suggestion, Nadia's even more convinced she's right. Turning back to the canvas on the easel, the woman starts coughing, and Rosalia asks if she's taking her medicine. Nadia reassures her, saying she takes it regularly, but the doctor said it'll take a little longer to fully recover. Smirking, she teases Rosalia again and tells her to think about her sweetheart instead. After breakfast with Nadia, our girl, now dressed as Antonio, finally heads back to the duchy. But turns out, Klaus has been waiting for him in his room the whole time, getting impatient. Antonio's floored to see the Duke in his bedroom, and Klaus immediately demands to know where de Hessen's been. This kind of behavior from Klaus is seriously getting on her nerves. Turning away, Antonio looks exhausted and says it's personal. Hearing that, the Duke figures the guy's got a secret lover on the side. Antonio wants to change, so he tells Klaus to get out of his room. But the Duke doesn't even flinch, because he's catching that same scent again. He reminds Antonio that he's his boss, and it's his job to manage and protect his employees. So he wants to know what personal business kept de Hessen out all night. This dude's thinking, employer or not, the Duke's got no business meddling in his personal life. Klaus fires back, saying imperial law gives the Duke the right to question commoners. Sleep-deprived and beat, Antonio just wants this over with, so he says he was hanging out with a friend. Klaus keeps pushing, trying to get a name. When he hears they don't know each other, the Duke wants to know if it's a guy or a girl. Klaus is even tripping himself out. Like, why the hell is he even asking this? He's got to get his head in the game, telling himself he shouldn't give a damn if Antonio's got a side piece or not. But then de Hessen cuts through his thoughts, blurting out that the friend was actually a woman. And now, since he's got to get ready for work, he tells the Duke to hit the road. Klaus still won't budge, saying any personal stuff can affect the job. Antonio's like, dude, it's only 7 a.m. and I'm not even on the clock yet. For some reason, the Duke just loses it and tells the guy to watch himself, because de Hessen's tone, his moves, his clothes, even his cologne are getting on his nerves. After ranting all that, he storms out of the room. The girl's totally lost. What's this guy's deal, acting like this first thing in the morning? She thought the Duke was gone. But when she turns around, she's horrified to see he's suddenly decided to come back. Leaning over Antonio, Klaus orders him to set up a meeting with Rosalia ASAP. When asked if he could just relay the message, The Duke smirks and says it's personal. He also wants to know where Antonio's sister is living now. With his head down, the servant replies that Rosalia won't be able to meet with him. The heroine can't keep going like this and refuses to let herself walk down this deadly path. So she's saying Rosalia's with someone super important right now. The Duke's got a hunch who this important someone might be, but he doesn't get a chance to figure it out because Antonio bolts, yelling that it's a private family matter. Now the Duke's left wondering, is Rosalia closer to Marquis Eucaliote than he thought? All this confusion about the whole thing just keeps getting worse over time. Later, watering flowers in the garden, she's like, why can't the Duke just back off when she's made it so clear she's not interested? Erlin, who's standing nearby, points out she's gone overboard with the watering and created a flood. De Hessen's approached by Abello, who thinks Antonio took things way too far, because his mission was just supposed to be delivering the donation, nothing more. The artist notices that the guy's clearly worried about something. Even though Antonio says he's fine, little Erlin agrees with her dad. Then De Hessen admits that even though it's not a huge deal, there's someone who's been bugging him. He's got zero interest in getting closer to this guy, but they have to keep seeing each other because of work, and it's just awkward. Thinking about it makes her remember that kiss with the Duke. She grabs her head, trying to shake it off, thinking she's losing it. Suddenly, Abello points out that Antonio obviously doesn't hate this person, and when the guy tries to say he does, the artist isn't buying it. According to Abello, whether Antonio likes the guy or not doesn't matter. The point is, he needs to face the problem head-on. Running away won't fix anything. Once he figures out where he stands, the anxiety will vanish. Besides, Antonio's a man. He shouldn't be running from his problems. De Hessen's thanking Abello for the advice, says it really helped him out. She's gonna give that Duke the proper brush-off and be done with it, so she says goodbye to the Haunt family. Walking down the street, she sees some old dude getting tossed out of the bar, real rough. The guy's pissed he got mistaken for a beggar, says he's got money. But when he reaches into his pocket, he finds it's empty. The shopkeeper walks off, grumbling, and Antonio rushes over to help the old guy up. But the old man just gets mad and starts accusing the kid of stealing his cash. Antonio tries to help the old dude and walk him home, but he yells that he doesn't need any help and can find his own way. Realizing he can't do anything, the guy leaves the stranger and goes on his way. But after a few steps, Antonio turns around again and sees the old man still standing in the same spot. He rushes over to the guy, grabs his arm, and asks if he remembers his address. Now it's clear the old dude's got dementia. No wonder he's been having trouble. The guy keeps insisting he can make it on his own, but Antonio keeps pushing him to give up the address. Finally, the old man says the street name, though he doesn't sound too sure of himself. Antonio takes his hand and leads him along, cursing himself for his dumb habit of sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. They get to the right house, standing in front of some huge gates, and she's not convinced this is the right place. Still, the old guy opens the gates and heads on to the mansion grounds, even though Antonio tries to stop him. The name Bernas is on the gate. Turning to the kid, the old man asks if he's waiting for a special invitation and tells him to follow. When asked if he owns this mansion, the man responds with a question. Does he look like the kind of guy who just wanders into other people's houses? The heroine can't believe this lucky break. She actually gets to meet the artist, Count Waldro de Bernas. This mansion's covered in cobwebs, looks totally deserted. Waldro says everyone bailed on him because he forgot to pay them. Actually, in the original story, this guy showed signs of mental decline too. But when Waldro had his moments of clarity, he cranked out real masterpieces, and just one painting could wipe out all his debt. Antonio looks around, but doesn't see a single painting in the whole place. He asks if Mr. Bernas is still creating art. The old guy stares at him like, seriously? Do I look like I'm still capable of that? And while Antonio's trying to figure out how to answer that, Waldro suddenly asks him what he's doing in his house. Marquis Eucalio Lognan's secretary brings him the report on the investigation. Intel says that after Baron Hessen croaked, his kids, Antonio and Rosalia, are paying off his debts together. But get this, they're not blood-related. The Baron remarried and officially adopted Rosalia and her mom. Johannes is dying to know when this happened, and his heart stops when he hears it was 19 years ago. The Marquis grabs his head. 20 years ago is when his mom and Cecilia went missing. He was with them in the carriage when some cloaked dudes blocked the road. When the carriage flipped, Johannes was pinned underneath. All he could do was watch through a crack as his mom and sister were dragged away. The timeline of all this lines up with when the Baron got married. Thinking his mom might still be alive, the Marquis asks Lognan about Rosalia's mother. But turns out, the woman passed away 18 years back. Johannes dismisses his assistant, thanking him for his hard work. Alone, he wonders why his mother hasn't returned to the Marquisate. Maybe someone was after them, and she was trying to hide Cecilia and his identities. Maybe it's just wishful thinking, but Johannes has to find out if Roselia is Cecilia. Meanwhile, after cleaning Waldra de Bernas's house top to bottom, our girl feels totally refreshed. After tidying up, she cooks him dinner so he can get his strength back, recover quickly, and start painting again. After a bite to eat, Waldro suddenly starts feeling a weird chill. Promising to return tomorrow, our girl takes a carriage back to the duchy. Right there in the carriage, she strips off Antonio's clothes and changes back into Roselia. The girl agrees with Mr. Abello. Avoiding the problem won't solve anything, and she needs to face it head-on. Arriving at the estate, she thanks the coachman and asks him to leave the luggage in the hall on the main floor. The guy stares after the passenger, totally confused. Just before getting in the carriage, it was a dude. Now suddenly it's a chick. The Duke's in his study, and he just can't get that kiss with Roselia out of his head. He's told Lady de Hessen is here, and Klaus, spinning around to face the desk, is determined to have a calm conversation this time. He tells himself to stay cool and think straight, then tells the girl to come in. Roselia appears in the doorway, lighting up the whole room with her beauty. Pretending to be busy working, the Duke, trying to keep it together, asks her where she's been all this time. Even though Roselia says it's hard for her to talk about, he needs to know if she was with that other guy. No matter how hard Klaus tries to hold back, the words just spill out. He glares at her and demands to know if she was with that person she's been seeing. Roselia thinks this is irrelevant and none of the Duke's business, and she's here today to make one thing clear. According to her, she has zero feelings for Klaus, so she's asking him to stop bothering her and Antonio. The Duke smiles, gets up from the table, and walks over to Roselia. Leaning over her, he asks what the hell happened that day if she doesn't have any feelings for him. She says she just got caught up in the moment, and besides, she already has someone, and that kiss meant nothing and was a mistake. The Duke decides to test if Roselia will think this is a mistake too, and kisses her again. He feels her relax and kiss him back. Looking her in the eye, Klaus concludes that even if Roselia does have someone, she's still willing to do this with him. And he seriously doubts she can call it a mistake again now. Figuring it's the original Roselia's feelings from the novel, the heroine admits that her body is definitely drawn to Klaus. But that's where it ends. Even if her body's screaming for him, she ain't throwing her future away for some dead-end thing. 'Cause when you boil it down, they're just a debtor and a lender, tied together by cash and what they need from each other. The day they smear her name again, call her a traitor, and drag her to the chopping block, the Duke ain't gonna lift a finger to save her. Klaus is all, "What betrayal are you even talking about?" Roselia fires back that the Duke ain't one to do anything that screws him over. He's more the type to ruthlessly ditch anything he figures ain't worth it. She's dead certain she nailed the kind of guy he is. Klaus tells her to cut it out, saying it's messed up to act like this over something so far-fetched. But for Roselia, the fact that he didn't even deny it speaks volumes. Telling him not to try and sweet-talk her with words he doesn't mean, she walks out of the Duke's office. The girl leaves the estate, positive this should be enough to dodge the fate from the original story. She's not gonna die, and that's all that matters right now. And just like that, despite acting all confident, Roselia realizes tears are streaming down her face for some reason. The girl blames her character's body for everything. It clearly has a mind of its own. Just as she's about to head out the gates, Marquis Euclion approaches from the other side. And even though Johannes's assistant doubts they'll get in to see the Marquis without an appointment, he doesn't give a damn. He didn't come here to meet Balthazar, but to see his servant, Antonio. Strangely enough, tracking down Roselia has proven impossible. So her stepbrother, who works at the Duke's estate, is the only one who might have any info. And right at that moment, the gates swing open, and Johannes sees Roselia standing right there. Right behind her, the Duke suddenly appears, looking furious, and grabs the girl's arm. Roselia begs him to let her go, but Klaus is pissed that she left without even hearing him out. But their argument gets cut short when Marquis Euclion shows up, demanding to know what the hell's going on. Johannes ignores the question about what he's doing here and shoves the Duke's hand off of her. Then, he pulls Roselia aside and coldly asks Klaus if he can't see that she's not doing well. After making sure she's okay, the Marquis examines her reddened wrist. Klaus just stands there silently, not even understanding what came over him. Meanwhile, Johannes says that maybe he should come back some other time. And then he catches that scent. The one that screams Roselia is definitely from their family. The Raffelios clan has a unique body odor, exclusive to them, which, like pheromones, is unnoticeable to people of the same sex, but it's strongly felt by the opposite sex, especially when feelings of joy, grief, or affection intensify. Convinced it's Cecilia in front of him, Johannes suggests they head somewhere else together, if she's okay with it. He's stoked to finally find his sister after all these years. She must have been going through it, all alone in this foreign land. Hopping into the carriage, Johannes is itching to tell the girl he's her brother, but he knows the timing's off. Our girl looks up and catches the Marquise, giving her a deep, intense stare. The guy who's saved her butt yet again. Eucleon asks if she's having issues with the Duke, because from where he's standing, things looked pretty heavy. Roselia replies that she and Mr. Balthazar have a working relationship, and they just had a disagreement because of it. Hearing that, Johannes figures she really is struggling with paying off the Baron's debt. Claiming urgent business, she asks to be dropped off, and for a split second, she thinks she sees a flicker of disappointment in the Marquise's eyes. His eyes glued to her, Johannes almost calls her Cecilia, then asks if they'll be able to meet again. Noticing Roselia's weirded-out reaction, he tells her not to get the wrong idea. Johannes is saying it's not what she thinks, that she just looks a lot like his little sister. Then he asks her to come to him if she ever needs anything, for help. Stepping out of the carriage, Roselia's just thinking about how messed up this whole thing is. The second lead guy's supposed to be annoying, but for some reason, it's the opposite. After that whole situation, the main character went back to her everyday grind. She was working day and night, busting her butt to help the Count get his memory back. Turns out, it wasn't as easy as it looked at first. But if Bernace started painting again, Roselia could finally pay off her debt and get out of this place. So, one day, during one of her visits to Mr. Waldro, the main character finds a portrait of his son at the artist's place. According to the old man, he's leading the Empire's top Navy fleet on the front lines right now. He calls his son a good-for-nothing, saying that no matter how busy he is with state affairs, he could at least check in to see if his father's alive or dead. The heroine knows the Count used to be a soldier himself, so she asks him about those days. Back in his prime, Waldro sailed the Callio Sea, leading a fleet of dozens of ships. He even ran into a kraken, a sea monster, a couple of times. While Waldro's telling the story about winning the Battle of Clamon and getting to meet the royal family, the heroine is happy she's managed to bring back some good memories for the old man. But suddenly, the Count's face darkens as he remembers how many comrades he lost back then. He starts yelling for the fleet to retreat, to leave the wounded behind, and to only get the living onto the ships. And even though it takes a while, Antonio finally manages to calm Waldro down. The old man was acting like he was back on the battlefield, because clearly the pain of those memories still haunts him. No matter how much the heroine needs the money, she doesn't want to push things this far. Just as Antonio's begging Waldro for forgiveness, the doorbell rings. This guest is really laying on the buzzer, and Antonio tears off to answer it. De Hessen's totally caught off guard when he opens the door and sees Lady Closet standing there. Seeing as her friend's been dodging her lately, Miss Balthazar went the extra mile and tracked down where she's been hiding. Smiling sweetly, Closet asks where the Count is, wanting to say hello first. But when the girl approaches Mr. Bernace, he crosses his arms and declares he ain't buying anything from her. No matter how hard Lady Balthazar tries to explain who she is, he won't hear a word of it, and she's starting to doubt if he's really the artist Roselia's looking for. According to the girl, this is definitely Waldro. He's just in such a state that she hasn't even seen his work yet. Knowing Roselia needs this old guy to get rid of her brother ASAP, Closet asks if she can lend a hand. She grabs some paints, scribbles a house on the canvas that looks like a kid's drawing, and asks the Count to critique her masterpiece. Waldro, taking one look at her scribbles, says he could do better drawing with his feet. So the girl tells him to put his money where his mouth is. Since the stubborn old man refuses to prove anything to her, Closet asks Antonio to bring another canvas. The girl's really getting into this and is planning to keep going. She thinks it's a blast. While she's trying to figure out what to paint this time, Antonio brings the Count a snack. Without even looking up from the canvas, Closet asks him to save some for her. The girl decides to paint the vase of flowers next to her, and loud enough for Waldro to hear, she wonders what's so wrong with her painting. Finally, the old man can't take it anymore. He gives in, walks over to Closet, and snatches the brush from her hand. He starts fixing the painting, explaining that she used too much paint, and now the vase stands out more than the flowers. Declaring that the focus should be on the bouquet, he stands over the canvas for a while. When Waldro finally steps back, Antonio and Closet approach the painting and can't hide how impressed they are. The details are so precise, there's no doubt left. They're looking at a true master. Chloe starts gushing about her grandpa's talent, saying her drawing's way better because of him. The guy stares silently at his right hand for a bit, the one he just held the brush with, then suddenly announces he's hungry and tells Antonio to whip something up. Chloe tells the Count not to order the guy around, saying he's her servant, not his. Then, out of nowhere, Waldro points a finger at our girl and asks why she's wearing men's clothes. But when Roselia asks him to repeat himself, the Count just goes back to saying he's hungry. And Waldro can't even remember what he said after that. Back at the duchy, Chloe's still freaking out. She was so scared her heart's still pounding. Antonio admits he got super nervous too, thinking they were about to get busted. And just then, out of nowhere, the Duke pops up behind them, real curious about what they were supposed to get busted for. He's demanding we spill what happened and how we almost got busted. But Closet tells his brother to mind his own damn business and drags Antonio away by the hand. Calling out to Hessen, Klaus asks if Roselia told him anything. But since he says his sister didn't mention anything special, the Duke lets him go. After that, he heads to the palace, where he's got a meeting with a delegation from Raphalos. Approaching Marquis Eucliode, the Duke calls him out for being pretty rude earlier. Johannes thanks him for making time for this meeting and asks what Mr. de Balthazar's business with him is. Eucliode's heard that the guy standing in front of him only uses other people as pawns to get what he wants. But when the Duke suddenly asks about his romantic relationship with Roselia, Johannes starts cracking up. The Marquis doesn't know what's going on, but he figures something interesting is about to go down. So, he tells him that he and Roselia really did get back together after all this time, and it's made him incredibly happy because he's been waiting for this for ages. Seeing how seriously the Duke's listening, Johannes realizes Cecilia has really gotten under this guy's skin. Meanwhile, back at the duchy, the heroine is geeking out over a painting by Closet. According to her, she painted it following the advice of Mr. Waldro. The heroine's blown away that she never noticed this treasure right under her nose, and she doesn't get why the original novel didn't describe this side of Closet. Suddenly, Klaus walks into the room, puts a cage covered with cloth on the table, and says that as soon as he saw it, he immediately thought of his sister and bought it for her. The girl's surprised what's gotten into her brother, that instead of asking a servant to deliver the gift, he suddenly did it himself. Whipping the cover off the cage, Closet stares in awe at the incredibly cute canary sitting inside. The girl blushes, feeling flustered, and thanks Klaus for the gift. Then she runs over to her brother to ask for advice on what to name the bird. The heroine's jaw dropped watching this. She never thought she'd see the Duke smile like that. Klaus turns to Antonio and out of nowhere asks him to grab a cup of tea. As they settle in by the fireplace, the Duke senses the guy's awkwardness and tells him to loosen up. The heroine's totally lost. What the heck made this guy change so much? After a beat, the Duke compliments Antonio on the killer progress. Less than 3 months, and he only owes 1,000 barangs. Truth be told, he didn't think de Hessen would even pay back half of it. The heroine looks away, not wanting to see the Duke's smile. She's scared she's actually falling for him. Then, out of the blue, Klaus says that even after Antonio pays off his debt, he can stick around the estate. He acknowledges Hessen's talent and his killer eye for art. Antonio's gonna need a steady income to take care of his sister, and the Duke's willing to support them, maybe even find a nearby estate. De Hessen's turning down the offer, though, planning to bail as soon as the debt's paid off. Truth is, she hasn't even figured out where she's going yet, 'cause her only goal was ditching the dukedom. That's when Klaus chimes in, asking if she and her sister are heading to Raphelios. Makes sense to him, seeing as Marquis Eucliode is supposedly Roselia's lover. Antonio's caught off guard at first, but he decides to roll with it, saying that's exactly right. His hands are shaking so bad that when he tries to set down his cup, it clatters to the floor. Mopping up the spilled tea, she's trying to figure out why the Duke thinks the Marquise is her man. She's not sure if she should go that far, but since Johannes is being cool, she decides to explain the whole situation to him later. Out of nowhere, the Duke, knowing it sounds kinda weird, blurts out that Antonio and Roselia always smell the same. The guy tries to play it off, saying he and his sister use the same soap. The Duke gets up from his chair, telling Antonio one last time to seriously think about his offer. The heroine leaves the office, still wondering why Klaus has suddenly become so nice. Even though she promised herself she'd never change clothes again, she had to do it once more. Roselia and Closet head off to visit the crown princess at the palace. Sitting in the garden, Lady de Balthazar enthusiastically recounts the story of how Antonio fell into the water because of her hat. Evelion's glad de Hessen is okay and asks if it's true the Duke saved him. According to her, even though you can't see it at first, Klaus does have a softer side. The crown princess laughs, reminding Closet about the time, 8 years ago, when he brought his sister a live bunny. Klaus said back then that he'd skin it and make a muff for her. Closet ended up crying her eyes out, feeling sorry for the little creature. Lady Balthazar doesn't think this story is funny, seeing as how she was traumatized by her brother's actions. To change the subject, Roselia thanks the crown princess for the invitation and replies that she's always happy to make time for people she likes. And then Cosette decides to ask Evelion if it's true that people from the Raphelius line naturally exude a powerful scent. Roselia almost choked, thinking the girl was going to ask the crown princess about the marquise. According to Ivelion, she's only read about it in old records, so she doesn't know much, but there really was such a lineage back in the day. Now it's almost gone, and even if someone inherits those traits, it's hard to say for sure. The crown princess heard that their family passes down methods for controlling the scent, so there aren't any visible differences from regular folks. Just then, Marquis Eucaliote passes by the gazebo and notices Cecilia there. And while Cosette's geeking out over this incredible story, our girl's thinking that Esteban's words, which she thought were total BS, were obviously the real deal. Johannes interrupts the girls' chat and asks if he can bum a cup of tea. The crown princess doesn't mind, but she's waiting to hear what her friends think. The Marquis apologizes for being too forward and is about to leave. Chloe stops him, saying that everything's cool. The crown princess invites the Marquis to sit with them. The heroine catches a faint scent coming from him, probably the one Evelion was talking about. Turning to Roselia, Johannes asks how she's doing and says he's glad to see her again. When tea is over, the girls head back to the duchy, escorted by the Marquise. Chloe whispers to her friend, asking when she managed to meet Euclid. She replies that she bumped into him at the imperial ball. The heroine decides to take this chance to talk to Johannes about their so-called relationship. He leans in close to Roselia, gently plucking a fallen petal from her hair. He can smell her potent fragrance, which means her bloom's about to happen. She must not know how to control it yet, because the scent's getting stronger, and that could put Roselia in danger. Since she's clueless why he just touched her hair, Johannes shows her the petal. He's thinking that when she blooms, he needs to be by Cecilia's side, no matter what. Just then, the Duke walks down the hallway, and seeing this, clenches his fist, totally jealous and pissed. Balthazar thinks it's pretty bold to invite a guest to the estate without telling him. She wasn't ready for this encounter, especially dressed as Roselia. The Marquis apologizes for arriving unannounced. The Duke invites the guest to stay and relax. Then, turning to Roselia, asks her for a word. But Johannes just cuts in, saying that's not going to happen, because he and the girl were just about to have a private chat. As Roselia's boyfriend, the Marquis is hoping His Grace can understand where he's coming from. With that, he turns to the girl and gives her a wink with a smile. Roselia freezes, totally confused how Marquis Euclid even knew about this. Seizing the moment, Johannes asks the Duke to quit treating Roselia with such disrespect. Klaus, though he gets that the guy's trying to protect his girl, still reminds the Marquis he's not in Raphelios and suggests he not push his luck in Lugvelset. Johannes thinks looking out for the woman he loves isn't about location, and it's important to him that Roselia's comfortable no matter where she is. He declares he won't back down if anyone gets in her way, whether it's the Duke, the Crown Prince, or even the Emperor himself. Not being able to take their bickering anymore, the girl steps between the men and tells them to knock it off. Spotting a soldier running towards them, she tries to shoo the Marquis away, claiming someone's calling for him. Figuring he's got no choice, Johannes is about to head out, but reminds Roselia one last time that she can always call on him if she needs anything. After seeing him off, she asks the Duke what he wanted to talk about. Now that Roselia's here, Klaus suggests she join him for a bite. She's thinking of turning him down. But when she looks up at the Duke, she sees the pleading look in his eyes. Guessing she might regret it later, she agrees to have dinner with him. And just like that, she's sitting at the table with Klaus and Cosette. It's so quiet in the dining room that Roselia starts to feel suffocated by the awkwardness. Cosette's the first to crack, though, declaring she can't eat in this atmosphere. She asks her brother what's gotten into him, suddenly doing these totally baffling things. Keeping his cool, the Duke calmly replies that he just thought it would be nice to share a meal with her and Roselia. and he's bummed Antonio couldn't make it. She says, all sarcastic-like, her brother's probably too busy right now, paying off his debts. Klaus notices she's barely touched her food and offers to get her something else. Seeing how nice her brother's acting, Closet's starting to think he's, possessed or something. The Duke suggests they ask the chef to whip up something new, but Roselia turns him down. Meanwhile, Closet keeps freaking out, saying her brother's body's been snatched by some evil spirit. But Klaus just calmly says, like always, that he's fine. That evening, back in her room, she's standing over an open suitcase. Because she's so freaked out by the Duke's weird behavior, she's decided to pack up and ditch this place. But then, out of nowhere, Klaus's voice comes from behind her. He asks if it's normal for Roselia to just up and leave without saying goodbye to her brother. Snatching up her bag, she says she can see Antonio some other time. The Duke's all like, I'm shocked the Marquise isn't helping you pay off this debt. But Roselia shoots back, it's a family matter, and Johannes has nothing to do with it. Then Klaus asks how her wrist is doing, after he squeezed it pretty damn hard. He hears she's okay and tries to justify his actions, saying he just got carried away. Roselia catches a whiff of booze on the Duke and says, that never stopped you from treating me however you wanted before. Klaus owns up to it and straight up apologizes to Roselia. The Duke admits, I shouldn't have said those things back then, and I seriously regret it. But, he adds, if I were the Marquise, I'd have paid off the whole damn debt for my girl, just to keep her from being with anyone else. Looking into Klaus's eyes, she's thinking, is he really falling for me? No way! He pins her to the wall, leans in close, and begs her, don't go with that other guy. Klaus says it with a tender, heartfelt voice, one the heroine's never heard from him before. But she's got no choice, so she pushes the Duke away and tells him she has to go. Turning around, she sees the way Klaus is looking at her as she leaves. Roselia can feel that she's changed this heartless guy, made him warmer. But the girl tells herself to get a grip, 'cause this just can't be happening. Once outside, she sits right down on the ground, hugging her knees to her chest. Roselia promised herself she'd never fall for him, and now she's trying to blame it all on the wine she had at dinner. The heroine's gonna give herself some time, figuring everything's gotta go back to normal eventually. The next day, Closet and Antonio head out for a walk to enjoy the beautiful sunny day. Since Lady Balthazar couldn't ask her friend about it yesterday, she wants to know when the heck Marquis Eucliade became her sweetheart. She just confessed she lied to the Duke, told him she was head over heels for Johannes. Closet thinks if the Marquis is playing along, maybe he's actually got a thing for her. He's definitely got feelings for Roselia. There's no other reason he'd be so nice. Hearing her friend's wild theories, she starts making faces. Being around the Marquise is nice and easy, but she doesn't have any romantic feelings for him at all. She insists that's not it, and Eucliade is probably just messing with her. Meanwhile, the Duke's watching Closet and Antonio stroll through the garden from his window. He's staring intensely, lost in thought, at de Hessen, who's grinning like a fool. Alejandro breaks the Duke's train of thought, asking what his Grace is staring at so hard. Klaus jumps, then denies seeing anything out the window, but his reaction just makes him look even guiltier. The Duke's accusing Alejandro of tiptoeing around his office like he's got nothing better to do. The secretary reminds him that he was the one who told him to sort the documents in the first place. He's giving the Duke an update on the school construction, mentioning something about shops and residential areas. But Klaus isn't listening. He's stuck on how he was staring at Antonio without even realizing it, all because he and his sister look so alike. After spending the evening at Count Bernas's place, she tucks him into bed and leaves the room. Closing the door behind her, she stretches with relief, because another day at work is finally over. Even so, she doesn't feel like going back to the duchy, because she doesn't know how she's going to face Klaus now. To kill some time, she decides to tidy up the Count's estate a little. She walks into Waldro's study and notices a whole stack of documents lying on the floor. Picking up the papers, she finds a letter from the Eskiven naval base among them. The letter says Lord Ashton de Bernas, Count Waldro's son, was killed in action. The next morning, Antonio goes to see the Count to talk about his son. Waldro's back to calling his son an ungrateful brat who can't even bother to call his own father. De Hessen changes her mind about upsetting the old guy and hides the papers from him. The letter said Bernas's son bit the dust in battle 6 months ago. As far as our girl knows, the Count had a fainting spell around the same time, and that's when the memory issues started. Looking at the old man, she figures maybe it's better for him not to remember anything. As she's leaving the Count's estate, lost in thought, some dude in a hood suddenly comes running at her. He bumps into her with his elbow as he's running past. She hits the ground, but the stranger doesn't even stop to say sorry, just keeps on running. Looking around, the girl realizes she's on a school construction site. And then, a memory flashes back to her. The Dreamleaf incident from the original story. That was the turning point. The thing that really drove a wedge between the Duke and the Crown Prince. Dreamleaf causes crazy hallucinations and it's super addictive, so the Empire keeps a tight lid on it. Klaus got busted trying to deal the stuff, and they found it on the Duke's construction site. Jumping to her feet, the heroine chases after the stranger, yelling at him to stop. She demands he explain what he was just doing, because she knows the workers should have gone home by now. Up until now, Klaus only made money from totally legit businesses, so maybe someone planted that illegal stuff there on purpose. The heroine's almost caught up to the hooded figure, but he suddenly spins around and swings a heavy beam at her. Shielding herself from the blow, all she can think is that Klaus might have been framed. The heroine takes a shot to the head, slams into the ground, and the perp bolts. Watching him run, Roselia figures she needs to spill the beans about someone trying to frame the Duke. Back at the Balthazar estate, Antonio bursts into the Duke's study, saying it's an emergency. But when Klaus is all ears, de Hessen stumbles over his words. 'Cause he's clueless how to explain it all. Yeah, the heroine knows the future, and there's supposed to be Dreamleaf stashed at the construction site. But she's got no clue how to tell the Duke someone's trying to set him up, 'cause how would she even know that? So, Antonio says some shady character was lurking around the school construction, and they should check it out. Spotting scrapes on his hands, the Duke asks what happened. Yanking his hand back, Antonio says that's totally not the point right now. Finding out de Hessen was actually at the site. Klaus sighs and tells him to quit messing around where he doesn't belong. He's ordering him to the infirmary, like now! Dr. Nelson should still be up at this hour. The Duke insists the area's secure and practically shoves Antonio towards the dock. De Hessen just wants to talk, but Klaus ain't hearing it till he gets that wound checked out before it gets worse. Finally, Antonio caves and promises he'll go to the infirmary. But surprise, surprise, she's actually heading to the construction site to figure things out herself. And she's totally beating herself up for always sticking her nose where it doesn't belong. Roselia's like, why am I even here, waiting for this creep to come back? I shouldn't care if Klaus lives or kicks the bucket. Meanwhile, the Duke himself shows up at the construction site, even though Alejandro tried to convince him to come back during the day. Klaus apologizes to his secretary for dragging him out so late and offers to let him head back if he's freezing. But Alejandro doesn't want to leave his boss's side. Who else is going to be there for him, right? The Duke's just going to pop over to the construction site for a sec, says he'll be right back. And wouldn't you know it, that's when our girl spots that hooded dude she bumped into earlier. She's keeping a close eye on him, trying to see where he stashes the Dreamleaf. Just then, Rosalia sees the perp hide a little bag under one of the beams. As he's making his escape, the guy drops something. Looks like a brooch or something. Whatever it is, right now we gotta focus on collecting evidence. Just like she thought, she finds the Dreamleaf under the beam. All right. So, someone is trying to frame Klaus. Meanwhile, the guy who bolted from the scene realizes he's lost something. He heads back to where he thinks he dropped it and sees some dude bending over the beams. Antonio spins around, trying to figure out what the hell to do now. Right then, the support beams beneath him give way, and he's plummeting down. When de Hessen opens his eyes, he's pinned under the collapsed beams with the Duke, who's holding them up, keeping them from crushing the kid. Hearing a loud crash, Alejandro hauls ass to help his grace. While he's trying to find his master under the rubble, some hooded figure bolts from the scene. Klaus, covered in blood, is shielding Antonio. De Hessen sees him shaking, trying to bear the weight of the beam crushing his back. Barely holding on, Duke Klaus tells Antonio to stay still. Hearing Alejandro's voice from above, she yells to him that the Duke's been hit. The secretary sprints like crazy to get the workers to help. Antonio's freaked out by the blood on Klaus's back, asking if he's hurting and what they should do now. The Duke tells the kid to shut it, saying all the talking is just making him weaker. He tells Antonio to stay put, because if anything happens to him, it'll just stress him out more. It's getting harder for Klaus, but he's glad the beam fell on him and not Hessen. I mean, looking at Hessen's build, seems like he could snap in half from the slightest bump. The heroine notices a drop of sweat trickling down the Duke's chin. Reaching out, she gently wipes it from his face. Klaus angrily reminds Antonio that he told him to stay still. Alejandro managed to find some workers, and they're already trying to dig the Duke and de Hessen out from under the rubble. Once they finally get them out, the secretary bombards Klaus with questions about what happened, why the building collapsed, and what Antonio's doing there. Just then, a panicked Closé races onto the construction site. Hearing what happened, the girl was freaking out with worry and rushed over to see if Antonio was okay. De Hessen says he's fine, which isn't exactly the case for the Duke. According to him, if it wasn't for Klaus, things would have gone south real fast. Suddenly, tears start streaming down Closé's face. Antonio's beating himself up, saying he's so sorry the Duke got hurt because of him. But the girl tells him to stay put, insists it's not his fault, and goes to her brother. Klaus tells his sister to calm down, says he's all right, and that she needs to get some sleep. Still crying, Closé reminds him how their father once said the same thing, that his wound wasn't deep. Lying in bed, all bandaged up back then, he stroked his daughter's head and told her not to worry. Dad said the wound wasn't that bad, and promised Mom and him would get better, and we'd all go on a picnic by the pond again. In the original story, the Duke and Duchess died young in a carriage accident, and Klaus and Cosette lost both their parents at once. Mom was gone instantly at the scene, and Dad passed later, back at the estate, and that trauma really messed her up. Cosette starts screaming, telling Klaus he better not die and leave her alone, or she'll never call him brother again, ever. The Duke just stares at his sister, and that pisses her off even more. Finally, he reaches out and pats Cosette on the head. Klaus tells his sister not to say such awful things, because he'd never die and leave her all alone. The girl puts on a stern face and shakes her fist at her older brother. Then she orders him and Antonio to get back to the estate immediately and get those wounds treated. Pronto! Huffing in annoyance, Cosette puts on airs and, nose in the air, heads towards the manor first. Klaus and Antonio exchange amused smiles, finding her behavior entertaining. The Duke's wounds were bandaged, and he was advised to change them often to avoid scarring. According to Alejandro, Antonio only had a few scratches and is doing fine. Suddenly, the secretary remembers that the workers found something at the construction site while clearing debris. He shows the Duke a dream leaf, which was apparently hidden under the building beams by someone. Alejandro suggests investigating to see if the plant was deliberately hidden there, but since it's late, Klaus postpones it and dismisses the secretary. Alone, the Duke reflects that if things had gone differently, he could have ended up in the imperial prison. Someone was clearly trying to set him up, but it's unclear how Antonio found out about it. Klaus reaches for the bandages to change them, and just then, de Hessen knocks on his door. He came to properly thank the Duke, as he couldn't do so earlier, because everything happened so fast. Besides that, he's about to tell the Duke something, but when he walks in and looks up, he blushes like crazy. The Duke's standing in the middle of the room, shirtless, rewrapping his ripped torso. Klaus doesn't get why his appearance is making the guy so flustered. He's just changing bandages, for crying out loud. He tells Antonio to get down to business, and Antonio pulls out an item from his pocket. The thing the Dreamleaf planter dropped at the construction site. The Duke examines the trinket, but the crest on it doesn't belong to any noble family he recognizes. The thing looks like a badge you'd wear on your chest, but for some reason, it's missing a pin. There's no doubt now, if someone really planted that stuff at the site, then this whole thing is definitely shady. De Hessen, meanwhile, is trying to figure out what crucial detail from the original story she's missing. If Klaus isn't the mastermind, then who's trying to frame him? Suddenly, a hunch hits him, and he rushes to share it with the Duke. Antonio thinks it might be smart to connect this incident to Archduke Rubelio. Klaus is freaking out, yelling, asking if he even realizes what he's suggesting. The Archduke is practically royalty, and Antonio's got to know how serious these accusations are. Archduke Rubelio is the Emperor's little brother and the Crown Prince's uncle, basically next in line for the throne. In the original story, this guy was just a footnote, so the heroine didn't give him a second thought. Klaus says if anyone heard Antonio talking like that, he'd be swinging from a rope for disrespecting the imperial family. Hessen gets it, but he just wanted to give the Duke a heads up. Better safe than sorry, you know? Klaus can't deny there's some truth to what he's saying. He says Antonio and Roselia are equally unpredictable and always stirring up some unexpected drama. Putting the evidence in the box, the Duke tells de Hessen to stay out of this from now on. He tells him to curb his curiosity, never say things like that again, and just forget the whole thing. Antonio tries to argue, but Klaus snaps and orders him to shut it, saying it's way too risky. One wrong word, and this guy could vanish into thin air, especially after today when he almost bought the farm. Turning away and calming down a bit, the Duke tells Antonio to lay low here for a while. The heroine senses Klaus's concern, but his real game is still a total mystery to her. He's already saved her twice, even if it was as Antonio, and she hasn't paid him back at all yet. Approaching the Duke, Antonio asks to at least help him with his bandages. Klaus refuses and tells him to get his hands off, saying that kind of thing between guys just makes things weird. Still, the heroine knows her conscience won't let her rest if she doesn't do this, so she begs the Duke to let her. Klaus finally agrees, but only if Antonio gets it done as fast as humanly possible. And while the Duke sits there, feeling awkward, the heroine bandages his wounds, even though it turns out to be harder than she thought. Just as she's finally wrapping things up, their faces get so close, her heart starts pounding like crazy. Feeling awkward again when their eyes meet, the Duke tells Antonio to get lost. Even though Hessen isn't finished, Klaus coldly repeats that it's enough. Not understanding what suddenly upset the Duke, Antonio bows and takes off. The heroine thinks getting this worked up over badly applied bandages is a bit much. Left alone, Klaus tries to figure out what the heck's been going on with him lately. The thought that he might have feelings for Antonio is totally messing with his head. The Duke can't believe it. Is he seriously attracted to both sexes? But there's an even bigger problem. Because he can't be feeling attraction to both a brother and a sister. That's just not possible. The next day, Klaus shows Alejandro the brooch he found. He's telling his secretary that Antonio says someone deliberately hid the dream leaf at the construction site. The Duke orders a thorough investigation, because that thing could be a crucial piece of evidence. Klaus also orders a bodyguard assigned to Antonio, discreetly, because he can't leave his inner circle unprotected, knowing someone wants to mess with him. The Duke himself is heading to the Imperial Palace for a while. Arriving for an audience with the Crown Prince, Klaus tells him about the dream leaf found at the construction site. He also informs him of his intention to investigate and bring the culprit to justice. After listening, Esteban, after cracking a few of his usual jokes at the Duke's expense, suggests taking a look at the dream leaf he brought. Looking at him, Klaus wonders how the once promising Crown Prince could have changed so much. It seems like it started back then, after the Empress died. Ever since that day, Esteban's been different. Suspicious of everything that moves. Yeah, it was a total tragedy. But back then, Klaus was fighting tooth and nail for his family's reputation, so the Crown Prince was just a pathetic loser to him. After a good look at the dream leaf, Esteban says he's pleased the Duke himself is visiting, though an investigation is definitely needed. Klaus isn't sure if he's actually happy or just being a sarcastic jerk. Then, out of nowhere, the Crown Prince asks how Antonio's doing. Esteban tells him not to take it personally. He's just curious because he hasn't seen the guy in ages. With another snide smirk, he asks if the Duke knows anything about the Raffelios family. After getting a yes, the Crown Prince wonders if he knows about their unique scent. Balthazar has absolutely no clue what he's getting at. And then Esteban, giving Klaus a friendly pat on the shoulder, says it was just a random thought, and asks him to say hi to Antonio. Watching the Crown Prince leave, the Duke wonders when those two got so chummy. Esteban brings the hallucinogenic herb to his uncle, explaining it was planted on Duke de Balthazar. He wants to know what Glaudin de Rubelio thinks about it. The Archduke turns the dream leaf in his hands, deep in thought. He figures if Klaus was behind this, he wouldn't have passed the herb to His Highness. As far as he knows, the Duke's loyal to the imperial family, and unlikely to be mixed up with any shady stuff. Esteban's shocked that his uncle actually believes in de Balthazar's loyalty. After all, he remembers perfectly well that they offed his mother. Glaudin understands the Crown Prince's feelings, but reminds him there's zero proof the Empress was murdered. Still, Esteban can't wrap his head around why a perfectly healthy person would suddenly drop dead like that. He's convinced his mother was poisoned by the Noble Alliance to weaken the crown. The old emperor's been dead for ages, but they still refuse to acknowledge him. Esteban will never forgive them for that. He's planning to make them pay for everything. The Balthazar dukedom, the Herden Marquisate, the whole damn Noble Alliance. That's why the Crown Prince is tasking his uncle with keeping a close eye on the dukedom. He figures if anyone's going to try to rise up against the imperial family, Duke de Balthazar will be leading the charge. Esteban also orders him to watch the Crown Princess. She's playing it cool now, but she'll make her move the second we let our guard down. Placing a hand on his uncle's shoulder, the Crown Prince says he's the only one he has left. He can't even begin to express how grateful he is that Glaudin is still on his side. The Crown Prince asks his uncle to promise he'll stick with him for a long time to come. The Archduke smiles at His Highness and gives him his word. After that, Glaudin gets up because he needs to meet with the Crown Princess. Storming out of Esteban's place, de Rubelio grits his teeth, furious at the useless morons who botched hiding the dream leaf so badly. If the imperial family had gotten to this first, it would have been the perfect chance to take the Duke out of the picture. The Archduke thinks that idiot crown prince doesn't suspect a thing, but he's not sweating it too much, hoping his time will come, and next time he'll wipe them all off the map in one shot. De Rubellio's convinced this empire is rightfully his. When Glaudin drops in on the crown princess, he finds she's not alone. Right then, Ivlion's holding another meeting with Antonio. The Archduke wants to know who this young guy is, and the crown princess introduces him as a guest from the duchy. When Antonio introduces himself to de Rubellio, he remembers hearing about this servant of de Balthazar. He asks de Hessen if it's true he's the one who found the dream leaf at the school construction site, and he confirms it. The heroine's totally bummed that the Archduke knows who she really is. Noticing Antonio's face drop, the crown princess suggests they wrap up their meeting for the day. De Hessen leaves Evelion's office, and meanwhile, Glaudin announces he's here to tweak the terms of their deal. She's trying to figure out why the Archduke's giving her that death stare, and she's starting to think de Rubellio might be a real piece of work. As she's walking down the hall, lost in thought, Marquis Eucliade suddenly appears in front of her. Even though she's dressed in a dude's suit, Johannes recognizes her right away and calls her by name. Completely forgetting she's supposed to be pretending to be Antonio, she greets the Marquis and immediately realizes she blew her cover. Hessen tries to cover her slip-up by saying she's heard a lot about Eucliade from Roselia. Johannes just silently listens to the story about how the brother and sister are always getting mistaken for each other. He's still trying to figure out what the heck Cecilia's doing pretending to be a guy. Meanwhile, Antonio's laying it on thick, telling the Marquis how pleased he is to meet him. So that's why Johannes couldn't track down Roselia. But he's still clueless about what she's up to. Seriously, doesn't she realize that blood relatives in their family can recognize each other by scent? Shaking Antonio's hand, the Marquis says if Roselia's busy, they should definitely hang out sometime. When asked what he wants, Johannes says he's not sure, but figures they could probably get along. Whatever happens, he's making damn sure he stays on Cecilia's side. That evening, Alejandro reports to the Duke, updating him on the school construction progress. But Klaus is more interested in whether the secretary noticed anything off about Antonio. According to Alejandro, Hessen met with the crown princess, then immediately bumped into Marquis Eucliode. After getting back, he chatted with Lady Closet for a bit, and then paid a visit to Count Bernasse. The guards couldn't follow him inside, so we don't have all the details, but looks like Antonio's got a soft spot for the Count. The Duke's heard Bernasse is a little off his rocker, but he can't figure out what that's got to do with de Hessen. That's when Alejandro spots something weird in the security report. Looks like Antonio met up with Glaudin de Rubellio at the palace. While Hessen was meeting with the crown princess, the Archduke decided to pay Her Highness a visit. Klaus doesn't get why Antonio's not listening to him. He warned him to cut back on contact, even with people he's close to, because if the Archduke finds out about him, things could get real ugly. Pissed off, the Duke orders Alejandro to bring de Hessen to him. And that brings us back to Klaus pinning Antonio against the wall, about to check something out. After that, he tells the kid to take things more seriously, unless he wants to end up 6 feet under. The heroine just stands there, head down, not daring to say a word. So then the Duke just drops this bomb about wanting the three of us, him, Antonio, and Roselia, to have dinner together. Truth is, Klaus is hoping that if they all sit down at the same table, he'll finally figure out what he's really feeling. Antonio replies that it's a tempting offer, but Roselia's been super busy lately and probably won't have any free time. Besides, Sis already has a boyfriend, so dinner with another dude might be a little awkward, you know? The Duke says he's not trying to pull anything, he just wants to thank the brother and sister who are working so hard to pay him back. If the only problem is the Marquis, Klaus is ready to write Roselia a letter right now and ask her to cut him some slack this one time. Antonio then says that's not necessary, since his sister loves seeing new places, and she's currently on a long trip. In that case, Klaus is willing to send a carriage after the girl to bring her back. Anyway, the Duke asks them to let him know when it's convenient for him and his sister, and until then, he'll wait as long as it takes. With a sigh, Antonio promises to talk it over with Roselia. The next day at Nadia's place, our girl's freaking out, thinking she's totally doomed now. The artist tells Antonio to chill, or he'll be pulling his hair out at this rate. Collapsing on the table in despair, she wonders how she's going to be in 2 places at once, and then she notices that Nadia's got the same height and build as her. So, she decides to hit up the artist and ask her for a little favor. At first, Nadia says she's busy, but when Antonio offers to pay her, suddenly she's got all the time in the world. De Hessen tells the artist that all she needs to do is pretend to be his little sister, Roselia. Talk about a shocker! Turns out Nadia already knew who Antonio really was. The artist thinks this is a fun idea and agrees to play along, wondering if that guy's blind, if he hasn't figured out the brother and sister are the same person. To make this plan work right, she leaves Nadia's and heads over to Ucaleote. Antonio's telling Johannes that Roselia's in a jam and needs his help. The Marquise is totally down to do anything she asks. It's go time. The Duke and Antonio are waiting for Roselia outside the restaurant. Klaus wanted to eat at the mansion, but de Hessen insisted they get out for a stroll to clear their heads. She's planning to move fast and decisively. She never intended to give the Duke a single chance to confess his feelings. She's hoping Klaus will be as clueless as usual and won't suspect a thing. Finally, Rosalia appears across the street. Antonio waves and calls her over, but she doesn't even turn around. The Duke finds it weird that, for the first time ever, he feels absolutely nothing for Roselia standing there with her back to him. Just as Antonio's about to cross the street to get his sister, a carriage pulls up in front of her, and Marquise Ucaleote steps out. De Hessen's practically busting a gut trying to look shocked that Johannes showed up. Meanwhile, Klaus is finding it weird that he used to get so pissed seeing Rosalia with the Marquise, but now he feels nothing. Johannes is whispering to Nadia, asking if he can touch her to make it look more real. The artist agrees, and he raises his hand to stroke her hair. This whole meeting's starting to feel pointless to the Duke, because he realizes he's just not feeling anything. As the fake Roselia gets in the carriage with the Marquis and they take off, Antonio says, all fake sad, that it looks like they had some urgent business. He's bummed they have to cancel the restaurant reservation and promises to find another good day to meet up. Still, the Duke suggests that he and Antonio grab lunch together, since they're already out. Later, sitting in the restaurant, Klaus is getting this growing feeling that that wasn't Roselia out there. Looking at Antonio, he thinks about how charmingly he eats. The Duke just caught himself thinking a dude was cute. He's clutching his head, refusing to believe it. Later, our girl meets up with Johannes and Nadia to thank them for their killer performance. Nadia tells her not to sweat it. She had a blast and was stoked to work with the Marquise. Eucleid's got a jet, so he says goodbye to the artist and Antonio, telling them to hit him up if they need anything else. Alone with Nadia, our girl hands over the agreed-upon payment. When she asks if the artist is doing okay financially, Nadia says she's fine, but she needs to buy something with the cash. After saying that, Nadia suddenly starts coughing like crazy again, just like before. Our girl's totally thrown. She thought Nadia was getting better. Nadia repeats that the healer warned her it'd take a while to fully recover. Our girl suggests finding a new doctor, but Nadia won't hear it and hustles Rosalia to get going. Alone, she stares at her palm, splattered with blood. Back at the Balthazar estate, she can't stop worrying about Nadia. She runs into the Duke on the way and greets him. But surprisingly, Klaus doesn't say a word, just walks right past Antonio like she's not even there. The first time, she figured the Duke was just super busy. But when it happened a third time, she finally realized it all came down to that dinner. He barely touched his food that day, probably feeling down because he got totally blown off. And his clueless servant just pigged out like nothing was wrong. She's pissed at the Duke's petty move. He could have just said he was upset instead of acting like this. Though, on the other hand, maybe it's a good thing, since this is exactly what she wanted. Totally sprawled out on the grass, she's got no clue the Duke's creeping up on her, quiet as a mouse. He's staring hard at Antonio, who's out cold. Meanwhile, his own brain's a total train wreck. Klaus plops down next to them, figuring it can't hurt to let the kid catch a few Z's. Gazing at the shimmering lake, the Duke's thinking about how it all kicked off when he freaked out that Antonio might kick the bucket. Klaus watches the sleeping dude and tries to sort out what the heck he's feeling. Before he even knows it, he's leaning over to Hessen and planting one right on his lips. Suddenly, he hears Closet's voice behind him. She's hunting for Antonio in the garden. Realizing what he just did, Klaus's face goes bright red. He jumps up like he's been shot out of a cannon and pretends he was just strolling by. Closet wakes Antonio up and reminds him about their promise to go on that picnic. They don't even notice the Duke, who's hiding nearby behind a pillar, touching his lips thoughtfully in complete confusion. The next day, the heroine leaves the estate, planning to head back to Count de Bernas. The Duke, who's also going somewhere, offers Antonio a ride. It seems weird to de Hessen, since Klaus has been avoiding him, but he gladly accepts to avoid walking. Still, the atmosphere in the carriage is pretty heavy, because the Duke doesn't say a word the whole way. Finally, Klaus breaks the oppressive silence and asks why Antonio keeps visiting the Count. He asks if anyone's tried to get in touch with de Hessen lately and gets a no for an answer. Then they just keep riding in total silence again. Getting to the place, Antonio rushes out to meet Waldro, who's waiting for him at the gates. Spotting the Duke, he recognizes him as the son of Duke de Balthazar. The Count's totally blown away to find out Klaus is the Duke now. Now Waldro, who Antonio's been desperately trying to get in the house, understands why Balthazar looks so damn big for a 10-year-old. Klaus is already saying his goodbyes and getting ready to leave, but the Count suddenly asks him to stick around for a quick cup of tea. The old guy's worried the Duke might chew him out for making the kid come all this way and not even inviting him in. The three of them head into the estate, totally missing the dude watching them from outside the gates. Remembering the kid used to love milk cookies, Waldro tells Antonio to bring some out and offer them to the guest. De Hessen reminds the old man that the young lady loves the cookies, not Klaus, and demands they bring something the kids like then. The second Antonio's out of the room, the Count's mood takes a total nosedive. Waldro tells the Duke that there's a dark cloud hanging over that kid. Mr. Bernays is sure Klaus has also noticed someone's got their sights set on the boy. And since he's too damn old himself, he's asking the Duke to take responsibility for Antonio. According to him, De Hessen is a pretty rare young dude these days. From the moment they met, Antonio's been helping Waldro in every way he can, even though they were strangers before, and he stuck around even when everyone else bailed. The Count doesn't know who's trying to mess with such a good kid, and he wants him to be safe, but he's just too worn down to protect him anymore. Smiling, the Duke tells the old guy not to worry, because he's already taking care of everything on his end. Back in the room, Antonio wants to know what they were talking about for so long. The old man, in his usual grumpy way, says he just got done scolding him, saying a helper like him is too good for this world. The Duke smiles as Waldro sends Antonio to buy the guest some candy, or whatever sweet stuff kids like. De Hessen repeats that Klaus isn't a kid, and sulks down on the couch, refusing to go anywhere. Dusting the Count's house and putting things in order, the heroine watches the Duke's behavior with surprise. She always figured Klaus was the type to keep people at arm's length, but he's really changed since she got here. Not only is he actually talking to Waldro, but he's even smiling for some reason. After finishing up all the chores around the house, Antonio says goodbye to the Count. Klaus, who also spent the whole day here, tells the old man to take care of himself as he leaves. Waldro asks the Duke to stop by again tomorrow because he wants to show him something. Looking at the Count's serious face, Klaus gets the feeling he knows something important. He promises to swing by tomorrow when he gives Antonio a ride again. Later, sitting in the carriage, the Duke shares his impressions of the visit with De Hessen. Klaus had heard the Count had dementia, but he seemed way sharper than he expected. The Duke wonders aloud if the old man got like this after his son bit the dust in battle. Antonio figures that's gotta be the reason, even though Waldro doesn't even remember his son's gone anymore. He admits he decided not to bring it up with the Count right now, and the Duke agrees with him. After a short silence, Klaus suddenly says there's still something he's curious about. But then, like he changed his mind, he turns to the window, and they ride the rest of the way in silence. The next day, the servants at the estate tell Antonio to carry a heavy box to the storage room. It's not the first time she's noticed how much they dislike her. The guys smirk, reminding Antonio that he's just a servant like them, even if he gets special treatment. De Hessen obediently lifts the heavy box from the floor, trying not to provoke them or make things worse. The box is way too heavy for her fragile hands. Her whole body's shaking, but she keeps carrying it. The Duke, appearing out of nowhere, snatches the box from Antonio's hands and asks angrily where it's supposed to go. Hess himself and all the other servants are staring at him with sheer terror in their eyes. Klaus scowls and repeats his question. Finally, one of the servants snatches the box from his grace, insisting everything's fine and he'll handle it himself. Antonio thanks the Duke for his help, who's pissed that he lets every two-bit punk push him around. Klaus offers to teach the kids some hand-to-hand combat. Since they need to head to the Earl's place, the Duke tells Antonio to move out, and he obediently follows, head down. He knows that now, after this little incident, the other servants are gonna hate his guts even more. The Duke opens the carriage door and tells him to get in. Antonio thanks him, but points out he really doesn't need to give him a ride every time, since it creates some awkwardness for him as a servant. Klaus reminds him that he also has business with the Earl. It'd be weirder if two people headed to the same place traveled separately. When Klaus and Antonio arrive at the Count's estate, for some reason, he doesn't greet them like he always used to. De Hessen finds it strange, so he heads to the study to check if Waldro's in there. Opening the door to the room, Antonio screams in horror. He rushes with all his might to the old man, who's lying face down on the floor of his study. Antonio begs Waldro not to leave him and shouts that they urgently need a doctor. The Duke picks up a piece of paper from the floor, lying next to the old man, and shows it to the guy. Turns out, the notification of the young count's death was sent to Mr. Bernas again. Lifting the old man off the floor and hoisting him onto his shoulders, Klaus figures someone did this on purpose. Hard to say exactly who it could be, but they definitely wanted to mess with the count.